I used to be a nameless, starving orphan shivering in the dirt with absolutely nothing to my name. But my luck turned when the powerful patriarch of the great Cheon clan took me in and gave me a single purpose. My life was no longer my own. My sole mission was to protect his only son. Looking up at their massive estate, a heavy sense of loyalty settled over me. Then I saw the kid I was supposed to guard. A chubby, terrified boy hiding behind his father. His name was Cheon Muryang, and from that day on, I became his shadow. He was weak, cowardly, and constantly crying, clutching his father's robes like a security blanket. I had no idea back then what kind of monster he would turn out to be. I accepted my role, completely blind to the fact that this kid would eventually destroy our entire clan. 15 years passed in a flash, and the patriarch suddenly died, leaving the clan vulnerable. With no one left to keep him in check, Muryang became a lazy, greedy nightmare. Our prestige vanished overnight, and our allies quickly abandoned us to save themselves. Yet, I stayed. I kept cutting down every assassin sent to take his life. I was his perfect, unbreakable shield, standing tall while he shook with fear behind me. As the rain poured down, he knew our enemies were closing in for the final strike. But the deadly strike didn't come from the front. It came from the person I was protecting. A cold blade pierced right through my back, held by the trembling hands of my own master. I stared into the rain, my heart shattering. 15 years of devotion, rewarded with a sword to the spine. He couldn't even look me in the eye as he stole my life, sweating and crying like the coward he was. I fell to my knees, my weapon clattering onto the wet stones as my strength slipped away. I gasped for air, coughing up blood, while my traitorous master hid behind my failing body. They say you can't fix a rotten soul, and I learned that lesson in the worst way possible. Through the storm, several crimson-cloaked figures emerged from the shadows. Muryang immediately dropped to his knees, begging the intruders for his life like a pathetic dog. These were the ruthless assassins of the demonic cult, and their blades gleamed coldly under the rain. My vision was fading, but my mind was perfectly clear with a bitter truth. I glared at him, cursing his absolute stupidity with my last breath. Did he honestly think these cold-blooded monsters would let him live just because he handed them my head? Did he really believe selling out his family to the cult would buy him a ticket to safety? The sky roared, casting a grim purple light over our crumbling estate. I watched with cold anger as his desperate gamble instantly fell apart. Lightning flashed, lighting up the terrifying monsters stepping into our home. Their leader stepped forward, holding a dark paper umbrella, bringing the literal chill of death with him. Behind him stood a laughing woman with a stitched face, and a giant carrying a basket of severed heads. Charming company. Muryang shrieked in absolute terror as the reality of his mistake finally hit him. A massive executioner stepped up, raising a giant broadsword high into the stormy air. My master tried to scramble away, screaming and crying as the giant closed the distance in a single step. With a single powerful swing, the executioner's blade carved through the air. I watched through half-closed eyes as my world faded, the rain washing over my face. The young master met a swift, pathetic end right there on the wet stones. Looking at his lifeless body, a wave of regret washed over me. I had wasted my entire life protecting absolute garbage. Memories of the late patriarch and the sniveling boy I swore to protect flashed in my mind like a bad joke. My sword lay useless in the mud, its light completely gone. I sat alone in the rain, my body broken, waiting for them to finish me off. The cultists surrounded me, drawing their weapons to end my miserable existence. I looked up at the dark sky, reflecting on a lifetime of pointless loyalty. I remembered when I was just a nameless orphan, holding a simple bowl under a warm sunset. The patriarch had named me Mu-myeong, meaning nameless. He gave me an identity just to turn me into a ghost. As the cold steel hovered over my neck, I made one final desperate wish to the heavens. Dozens of blades descended at once, tearing away my final breath. If I was ever given another chance, I prayed I would have a real name, and never live as a shadow again. And with that, the nameless warrior died, slipping into a cold, endless darkness. But instead of eternal rest, a strange warmth returned to my limbs, and I felt someone gently washing my feet. I opened my eyes to see a young maid carefully pouring warm water, her face filled with anxiety. I bolted upright with a shout, kicking the wooden basin and sending the poor girl scrambling back in absolute terror. I stared at my hands in shock, still feeling the phantom pain of 100 swords. The maid immediately threw herself to the floor, weeping and begging for mercy just because the water had gone cold. I looked closely at her and realized she was Wo-young, the maid who had endured Muryang's abuse for years. She kept sobbing, but my mind was spinning. Why on earth was she bowing to me and calling me master? I demanded to know where the young master Cheon Muryang was hiding. She looked up with tear-filled, utterly confused eyes and said, "Master, what are you talking about? You are the young master." my jaw dropped. I frantically grabbed my face, feeling soft, heavy layers of fat where my sharp jawline used to be. I scrambled off the bed and lunged toward the water basin, desperate to see my reflection. Staring back at me from the water was the round, puffy face of my traitorous master, Cheon Muryang. Of all the bodies in the world, I had to reincarnate as the bloated coward who stabbed me. I pinched my cheeks hard, hoping it was just a nightmare, but the cold air confirmed this was very real. Somehow, I had traveled 15 years back into the past, trapped inside the body of the very man who betrayed me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my chubby hands in complete disbelief, trying to process this absurd reality. I asked Wolyong if there was a shadow guard named Mu-myeong in the estate, but she shook her head, saying she had never heard of her. It hit me like a physical blow. Since my soul was in this body, the orphan girl Mu-myeong was never taken in. I had ceased to exist. I pushed open the window and looked out at the grand estate. A sudden spark of determination ignited in my chest. This was my second chance. I could use my future knowledge to protect the Cheon clan from the inside, long before the tragedy strikes. But looking around, I realized my room was surprisingly small and plain for the family's heir. These quarters were no better than those of a low-ranking disciple, which made no sense for the eldest young master. Then, my eyes caught a faint, beautiful blue glow resting on a simple weapon rack across the room. I recognized it instantly. It was the exact sword Muryang had used to plunge into my back. The Heavenly Light Sword. A legendary weapon of immense power and beauty, a blade forged from pure starlight, handed down only to the strongest warriors of the Cheon lineage. In Murim, a weapon like this is basically a cheat code, provided you actually know how to swing it. I picked up the heavy, glowing scabbard, my heart racing as I realized this legendary blade now belonged to me. My chest thundered with excitement as I gripped the hilt, feeling the raw, dormant energy humming within the steel. I slowly unsheathed it, a brilliant cascade of blue light illuminating my face, confirming its incredible quality. Eager to test it, I raised the sword and took a heavy stance, preparing to swing. But as I tried to move, my massive body wobbled, my feet stomping clumsily against the wooden floorboards. I gritted my teeth and forced a strike, crying out as the sheer weight of my own flesh dragged me down. I expected a majestic display of swordsmanship. Instead, my knees buckled under the strain, and I crashed heavily to the ground. My stomach violently churned, and I ended up vomiting right on the floor, completely exhausted after just one swing. Truly, a martial arts legend in the making. I stared at my trembling, sweaty hands in utter horror. This body was in far worse shape than I could have ever imagined. The quiet night was peaceful, but my mind was in absolute chaos. I sat cross-legged on the floor, attempting to focus my mind and tap into my internal energy reserves. I closed my eyes, recalling the smooth, perfect flow of energy I had mastered in my previous life. Normally, a martial artist's energy flows through clear pathways, gathering neatly in the lower abdomen, but when I searched inside this body, I found a chaotic, turbulent storm of clashing energies. Massive blockages of raw power were colliding violently, actively damaging my internal organs. I groaned in agony, sweat pouring down my face as the internal conflict threatened to tear me apart. It was gold spoon chi deviation. This is what happens when a spoiled rich kid gorges on rare, expensive elixirs without doing a single day of actual training. His body was essentially a ticking bomb of unearned power. The next morning, I dragged myself to the training grounds where the other disciples were already practicing their swordplay. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed as one of the trainees got hit squarely in the forehead with a wooden sword. The victim tumbled to the ground, rubbing his bruised head and complaining about the reckless strike. Standing over him was a smug, brown-haired boy, boasting about his easy victory and demanding his bet money. The bruised trainee grumbled, reluctantly reaching for his coin pouch while the bully laughed in his face. But the bully's laughter suddenly died down as he sensed a heavy, clumsy presence behind him. I was standing in the corner, slowly and deliberately practicing basic, wooden sword swings. The disciples began to whisper and snicker, mocking the useless young master for finally showing his face at the training grounds. I ignored them, my muscles screaming in protest as I struggled to complete even the simplest movements. Seeing me struggle, the bullies sneered, telling me to get lost because there was no place for a lazy pig on their field. I planted the wooden sword in the ground and took a deep breath. Running was my only option to burn off this useless fat. The bullies stared in absolute shock as I suddenly started jogging, their mouths hanging wide open. To be fair, seeing Muryang run was probably a historical event. I ran around the perimeter of the field, my heavy steps practically shaking the ground while the entire crowd stared in disbelief. They watched my retreating back, completely dumbfounded by this sudden change in behavior. One of them muttered that the young master seemed surprisingly persistent today. The smug bully, Nung Ryawoon, narrowed his eyes, a malicious grin spreading across his face as he resolved to make me leave. The hot sun beat down on me as I kept running, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and every step felt like dragging lead through deep mud. I realized the massive amount of expensive elixirs the original Muryang had consumed had turned into a literal poison inside his body. If this idiot had just trained properly, he would have been a prodigy. But instead, he turned his own body into a toxic wasteland. Suddenly, my finely honed warrior instincts screamed a warning, and I caught the blur of a silver weapon out of the corner of my eye. A real steel sword flew right past my head, close enough for me to feel the deadly rush of wind against my cheek. The blade embedded itself deep into the wooden wall behind me with a loud splintering crash. Plaster crumbled as the hilt vibrated violently, just inches from where I had been standing. I stared at the weapon in shock. Someone had just thrown a live, deadly blade directly at me. Nung Ryawoon strolled up with a smug smile, casually claiming his hand had simply slipped during a spar. His lackeys snickered behind him, clearly enjoying the blatant attempt to intimidate me. Nung laughed mockingly, his eyes filled with contempt as he waited for me to burst into tears. I looked at him, my gaze turning cold and sharp as I processed the level of disrespect these disciples had for the heir. They sneered, warning me that the training grounds were far too dangerous for a weakling, suggesting I go crawl back to my room. A quiet, deadly anger flickered in my chest. So this was how the original Muryang was treated by his own subordinates. Nyung smirked, confident that his little warning would be more than enough to scare the cowardly master away forever. He offered a fake, insincere apology, looking down on me like I was nothing but dirt under his boots. I forced a submissive, goofy smile, scratching my head and playing the part of the harmless idiot to keep them off guard. Time to win an Oscar. I turned around and jogged away heavily, letting them believe they had successfully broken my spirit. Behind me, the group erupted into roaring laughter, celebrating their easy win and mocking my pathetic retreat. They walked off, tossing their won coins in the air, eager to spend their easy money on drinks. Only Nung Ryawoon stood still, grinding his teeth in frustration because I hadn't run away crying like a frightened child. I accelerated my pace, my heavy boots kicking up dirt as I headed toward my real destination. I let them have their laugh. I knew that in my current state, a direct fight would only end in my defeat, so I had to swallow my pride. My goal was the Heavenly Dragon Library, where the Cheon clan's highly coveted secret martial arts manuals were kept locked away. Since I was technically the eldest young master, there was no way they could legally bar me from entering. Or so I thought. The warm colors of sunset painted the grand towers of the estate, casting long, dramatic shadows over the courtyard. I finally reached the massive, imposing gates of the legendary library, ready to claim the knowledge I needed. But my excitement vanished when the guard spoke, his words leaving me frozen in absolute disbelief. The scarred, battle-hardened guard let out a heavy sigh, looking at me with cold pity. He leveled his spear at me and coldly announced that I had officially been stripped of my title as the clan's successor. I stared at him, my heart dropping into my stomach as the reality of my ruined status set in. Denied entry to my own family's library, I stood like a speck before the towering pagoda, completely powerless. I dragged my heavy, trembling feet back to my cramped quarters, my grand plans completely shattered. I collapsed onto the bed, letting out an exhausted sigh as the physical toll of the day caught up to me. I sat in the dim light of my room, staring blankly at the wall as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Now I understood why my room was so small and why everyone treated me like garbage. I was no longer the heir. Without access to the library's secrets to clear my blocked meridians, I would have to find another, much more painful way to survive. I lay back, realizing that the original Muryang's childhood must have been a living hell of isolation and pressure. He had been surrounded by wolves his entire life, with his own subordinates mocking his ruined body and waiting for him to fail. Perhaps that was why he eventually turned to the demonic cult. He believed that even I, his loyal shadow guard, was just another enemy. I clenched my sheets in anger, shaking the thought away. No matter how hard his life was, there was no excuse for betraying the clan. He brought the monsters into our home, and for that unforgivable sin, he deserved to die. His tragic end was the direct consequence of his own weak-willed choices, and I wouldn't waste my sympathy on him. I sat up as a delicious aroma caught my attention, tracing it to a covered tray sitting on the wooden table. I lifted the lid to find a simple plate of stir-fried mushrooms. It seemed that even in this hostile house, there was still one person who cared. A quiet smile touched my lips as the moon shone brightly over the roof. Muryang actually had one loyal ally. Before the sun had even risen, I was back out in the courtyard, the quiet morning air cooling my skin. I began a rigorous stretching routine, determined to push this heavy body to its absolute limits. I panted heavily, my muscles screaming as I forced them to stretch and bend. I groaned in pain, my joints cracking loudly, but I refused to let the discomfort stop me. A soft, surprised voice broke the silence, asking if I was already awake and training. Wolyang walked toward me, cradling a bundle of clean laundry in her arms, her eyes filled with gentle curiosity. I offered a casual reply, and she bowed politely, wishing me a productive day before starting her chores. As she walked past, my eyes fell on the dark, heavy fabrics she was struggling to carry. I asked if that was my laundry, and she instantly flinched, her shoulders tensing up in fear. She began to panic, desperately apologizing and claiming she had dozed off, fully expecting a violent outburst. The original Muryang really was a piece of work. I looked at her with a gentle, reassuring smile. She might be a fragile maid, but she was the only real family I had left. I walked up to her, and she squeaked in terror, shrinking back as if waiting for a blow. Instead, I gently placed a hand on her trembling shoulder and softly thanked her for her hard work. She froze, her eyes spinning in utter disbelief as if she had just seen a ghost. I scratched my head with a sheepish laugh, warning her that she would have a lot more laundry to do now that I was training seriously. I turned and jogged away, leaving her standing alone in the quiet courtyard. Wolyang stared after me, her cheeks turning bright red as she clutched the laundry to her chest, utterly baffled by my kindness. When night fell, I was still at it, my heavy breathing echoing through the empty grounds. I ran through the dark stone pathways, pushing through the exhaustion that threatened to swallow me. Sweat poured from my brow as I forced my legs to keep moving under the pale moonlight. I let out a low shout, fighting the agonizing burn in my chest with pure, unyielding willpower. My body screamed that it was dying, but my spirit refused to let me stop. I remembered the brutal training of my past life, where a single mistake meant a beating from the instructors. They had screamed at me, calling me an ungrateful brat, forcing me to repeat the basic downward strikes 100 times. I had spent my youth hitting wooden dummies until my hands bled, while others enjoyed their lives. I remembered young Muryang laughing and playing with his father, completely oblivious to the pain of the shadow who guarded him. I had never been allowed to choose my own path. My life was lived entirely for the sake of another. I had held the sword only out of obligation, a nameless tool to be used and discarded. But now, things were different. A wild, triumphant grin spread across my sweaty face as I ran. For the first time in my life, training was actually fun, because I was doing it for myself. From behind a massive wooden drum, Wolyang watched me, her eyes filled with deep worry and silent admiration. She clenched her hands, whispering my title under her breath as she saw my steps begin to falter. I lost my footing and crashed face first onto the hard stone floor with a dull thud. But before she could run to help, I slowly pushed myself back up, wiped the dirt from my face, and kept going. Days passed, and even when a heavy rainstorm rolled in, turning the training ground to mud, I refused to stay inside. Under the shelter of the roof, the other disciples gathered, watching my progress with growing irritation. They grumbled as one of them had to hand over coins, having lost a bet on whether I would show up in the storm. Glad to know my pain was a source of entertainment for them, Noong Ryawoong glared at me, his face twisted in pure disgust as my persistence began to rub him the wrong way. His friend warned him to keep his voice down, reminding him that I was still technically the master, but Noong didn't care. He sneered, claiming that a stripped successor was nothing but a puppet with no real power. He boasted that the powerful unit commander would never take orders from a useless bloated fool like me. He declared that the only way to survive in this clan was to choose between the elders or the military commander, completely ignoring my existence. Laughing loudly, the group walked away into the rain, leaving Muryang alone with his thoughts. He stared at me, his eyes dark with a toxic mixture of annoyance and deep-seated jealousy. I kept running, splashing through the deep puddles, deliberately ignoring his hostile glare. He muttered that I was clearly plotting something, believing my training was just a pathetic show to win back my lost title. I ran right past him, the cool rain washing away my sweat as I focused entirely on my own rhythm. Muryang spat on the ground, furious that I had heard his insults and chosen to treat him like he was absolutely nothing. From the shadows of the corridor, Wolyang watched the interaction, her gaze fixed on Muryang's back. She stepped into the rain, her usual timid demeanor vanishing, replaced by a cold, protective rage. She stared daggers at Muryang, her eyes promising retribution for anyone who dared to insult her master. The next morning, the bright sun gleamed off the polished steel of the weapon racks at the training ground. I walked up and firmly wrapped my fingers around the cold hilt of a real training sword. I held it high, feeling the weight and balance of the steel, a familiar comfort returning to my hands. With a swift, fluid motion, I unleashed a perfect, blindingly fast strike that cut through the air with a sharp hiss. A highly satisfied smirk spread across my face. The baseline physical conditioning had finally paid off. My stamina was finally high enough to handle a real blade, and now I could use my swordplay to accelerate the absorption of those stagnant elixirs. Suddenly, a sharp shout cut through the courtyard, demanding that someone take back their words. I turned to see a hostile crowd of disciples quickly gathering in the center of the training grounds. At the center of the commotion was Wolyang, screaming at the top of her lungs, defending my honor against the bullies. My eyes widened in surprise. I never expected my quiet maid to stand up to ruthless martial artists for my sake. I watched as Nuong Ryo-woon grabbed her by the collar, his teeth bared in a snarl while she glared back with fierce defiance. The time for playing the fool was officially over. Nuong Ryo-woon was absolutely furious. His pride was completely shattered just because a lowly maid dared to talk back to him. But Wo-young didn't back down. She stood her ground, demanding he take back every single insult he threw at me. Naturally, the nearby disciples immediately started whispering, treating the whole scene like a cheap morning drama. A vein practically popped in Nong's forehead. He couldn't wrap his mind around a servant showing this much backbone. Wo-young stared him down with absolute defiance, ready to take a blow to protect my honor. Nuong's hand drifted to his hip, his fingers wrapping around the cold hilt of his weapon. He drew his steel blade in a flash, pointing it straight at her throat to break her spirit. Very brave, threatening an unarmed maid. But before the edge could even touch her, a sudden flash of wood collided with his steel, knocking his hand completely off course. Nuong stumbled back, his wrists shaking as he stared in shock at the heavy figure who had just deflected his strike. I stepped directly in front of Wo-young, holding my wooden training sword with a calm, steady posture. Nuong stared at me, sweat dripping down his face, struggling to comprehend how a useless pig had just stopped his attack so effortlessly. I looked back at him with cold, vacant eyes. The gaze of a seasoned master assassin was currently focused entirely on him. He stammered, backing away as the heavy pressure of my presence began to make the air feel thin. I didn't give him any room to breathe. I locked eyes with him and told him to raise his sword. I told him that if he had a problem with the girl defending me, he could take it up with me directly. I leveled my wooden sword straight at his chest, demanding he face me like an actual warrior. He scoffed, his smug attitude returning as he asked if I was actually stupid enough to challenge him to a duel. I let out a dry chuckle. A simple duel? No, that was far too boring. I looked him dead in the eye and asked, "How about we make it a life or death match instead?" I raised the stakes, promising that if he won, I would leave the training grounds forever and never hold a grudge. Wo-young panicked, begging me to stop because she knew this body hadn't touched a sword in weeks. But instead of replying, I slammed my wooden scabbard hard into the earth. The impact literally shattered the stone tile beneath my feet, instantly silencing her worries. Overdramatic? Yes. Effective? Absolutely. I stared at the ground, my voice dropping to a quiet, serious tone. I told her that while I could tolerate people throwing insults at me, I would never, under any circumstances, tolerate insults directed at the people who actually stand by my side. The dark aura of my past life as Mu-myeong flared behind me as I took my stance, telling Nuong Ryo-woon to draw his sword. Nuong grinned wickedly, thinking this was his golden ticket to humiliate the clan's useless heir once and for all. He took a solid stance, arrogantly calculating his superior speed and technique, completely confident of an easy victory. I stood perfectly still, raising my wooden blade with a level of composure he had never seen before. An invisible, heavy energy began to swell around my bulky frame, warping the air. Nuong froze, his eyes widening as he felt an overwhelming, crushing pressure wash over him. I quietly asked him, "Are you afraid?" He gritted his teeth, his pride forcing him to ignore the primal fear screaming in his gut. If he wasn't going to make the first move, I would. I lunged forward like a launching cannon. He swung his sword with all his might, but I spun past his steel with a fluid, blindingly fast step. He tried to recover, still foolishly believing he could predict my heavy movements. Through the blur of clashing weapons, my sharp eyes locked onto his sword, anticipating his path perfectly. With a resounding crack, our swords collided, and a sudden burst of force erupted between us. The sheer torque of my strike ripped the sword clean out of Nuong's grip, sending it spinning high into the air. His blade plunged straight into the dirt, leaving him disarmed, with the cold tip of my wooden sword resting gently against his throat. Nuong's eyes went wide with absolute horror. He had been completely defeated in a single fluid exchange. It slowly dawned on him that I hadn't even been aiming for his body. I had used his own blocking force to disarm him. He recognized the execution. It was the high-level Dragon Claw technique, leaving his mind spinning as to how a lazy master could possibly know it. I stood tall, looking down on him, pointing out how carelessly he swung his blade despite claiming this was a life-or-death match. Nuong collapsed to his knees, utterly broken and humiliated as I spat out a single devastating word. Pathetic. I sheathed my wooden sword and turned away, telling him he didn't even deserve to carry a weapon in his hands. My palm was bleeding, a painful reminder that Muryang's current body was still far too weak to handle my high-level martial arts. I tossed his sword to the dirt, telling him to think long and hard about why he wants to hold a blade, and to only challenge me again once he finds the answer. He sat there in a daze, engulfed in a cold shadow of shame, his entire reality completely shattered. I called Mu-myeong to follow me, marching out of the courtyard while the other trainees parted like the Red Sea, too terrified to speak. Mu-myeong reached out a trembling hand, still unable to accept that he had been destroyed by the clan's resident laughingstock. His hand fell limply to the ground, his spirit entirely broken as I walked away without giving him a single backward glance. We returned to the quiet corridors of the inner estate, the bright afternoon light casting long shadows on the stone floor. The moment we were behind closed doors, Mu-myeong fell to her knees, frantically apologizing for her recklessness. She bowed flat on the ground, weeping bitterly as she blamed herself for the bloody injury on my hand. I scratched my head, telling her to stand up. It wasn't her fault, the cut was simply because my body couldn't handle the strain of my own technique. She paused her crying, looking up at me with wide, tearful eyes, completely stunned by my gentle response. I smiled, resting my wooden sword on my shoulder and repeating my conviction. I told her I would never stand by and watch my people get insulted. I looked at her warmly, promising that no matter who the opponent was, I would always protect the ones who stand by me. Mu-myeong stared at me, her chest swelling with a profound sense of gratitude and relief. In that moment, she remembered the young master from years ago during the New Year's festival who had looked up at her and promised he would grow strong. He had pointed at a giant elephant lantern, declaring he would become a powerful patriarch capable of protecting everyone. The young boy had smiled proudly, promising to start training his swordplay the very next day. He had looked up at her, laughing as he noted she was taller than him, but promised to protect her regardless. Tears of joy spilled over her cheeks as she realized the kind, honorable young master she once knew had finally returned. She wept silently, her heart filled with absolute loyalty as she looked at the strong figure standing before her. But our peaceful moment was violently shattered by a cold, booming voice demanding to know if I could actually back up those grand words. I spun around, my hand instinctively resting on my hilt as a heavy pressure filled the room. I raised my sword defensively, immediately on high alert. Heavy, authoritative footsteps echoed down the hallway. It was Muryang's formidable uncle. A powerful, long-bearded man draped in a dark red cloak stepped into the light, radiating an immense, suffocating martial aura. It was Cheon, the Grand Master of the Heavenly Dragon Sword Corps and one of the absolute pillars of our family. I immediately bowed respectfully, apologizing for my long absence and greeting him with formal courtesy. Inside, my heart ached. In my past life, Xianxia was the one master I had trusted and followed most, and facing him like this was bittersweet. Xianxia barked at me, dismissively calling my courtesy pathetic and demanding a straight answer to his question. His gaze was just as cold and uncompromising as it was 15 years ago. I stood tall and firm, declaring that as the grand young master, I would never say something I couldn't take full responsibility for. Xianxia's eyes narrowed with dangerous fury, insulted that a spoiled brat was talking to him about conviction and protection. He growled that my mouth defiled those noble words, pointing out that the move I used in the duel was none other than the secret dragon claw. Since I wasn't a member of his corps, he accused me of learning the technique illegally from a traitor within his ranks. He vowed to hunt down and severely punish the traitor, challenging me to try and protect them as I had so proudly claimed. He threatened that if I failed to name the person, he would hold me responsible for the disturbance and ban me from the training grounds forever. I stared at his sheathed sword, immediately realizing his game. He was using this accusation as an excuse to get rid of me because he found me distasteful. Xianxia glared at me, waiting for me to break under the pressure and give him a name. I kept my gaze steady, knowing that a single wrong word would destroy both my reputation and my future. I looked my uncle dead in the eye and calmly answered that the traitor he was looking for simply did not exist. Xianxia's face twisted in utter disbelief, completely taken aback by my denial. I bowed my head and lied, claiming that the one who taught me was Xianxia himself, as I had merely copied the move after seeing him perform it once. Xianxia let out a loud, mocking burst of laughter, thoroughly amused by my ridiculous excuse. But his laughter stopped instantly, his eyes turning cold and sharp as he reached for the hilt of his masterwork blade. In a split second, A terrifying crimson wave of energy erupted from him, the sheer pressure forcing me and Muryang back. He stood like a god of war, declaring that a useless fool like me could never copy a secret technique after seeing it once. He ordered me to draw my sword so he could test my claims himself. Sweat poured down my face as I struggled to keep my footing against the oppressive weight of his physical aura. He stood enveloped in a deadly crimson light, ready to strike me down if I proved to be a liar. I gritted my teeth and offered him a challenge. I told him that if he didn't believe me, he could show me any technique, and I would copy it right in front of him. Xianxia stared at me, genuinely shocked by the absolute confidence in my eyes. He sheathed his blade with a heavy sigh, claiming he couldn't trust a single word coming out of my mouth. He turned his sharp gaze toward Muryang, ordering her to step forward. He demanded she tell him the truth about what kind of scheme her useless master was plotting behind closed doors. His voice boomed through the hall as he warned her of the consequences of lying to him. He threatened to cut her down on the spot if she uttered a single falsehood, her face turning pale with terror. Muryang's hands shook violently as she clutched her dress, the pressure of a grand master nearly crushing her spirit. But she took a deep breath, her mind flashing back to the past month of watching me run laps, scratch my head, and smile through the pain. She looked up and honestly told him that for the past month, the young master had done nothing but smile. Seonhak's jaw practically dropped. He was completely dumbfounded by her answer. He scoffed, asking how a brat with a massive inferiority complex could possibly be smiling while training. Muryang nodded, her heart pounding heavily as she stood her ground to protect me. She explained that even when I was running endless, exhausting laps around the freezing courtyard, I had always kept a genuine happy smile on my face. She recalled watching me run until I was gasping for air, but still laughing with absolute joy. I looked at her, deeply moved. I had no idea she had been quietly watching over me the entire time. I smiled softly, realizing she had understood the simple joy of my hard work. Muryang continued, telling Seonhak that even when the other disciples sneered and mocked me, I never once looked their way. She pointed out that the old Muryang would have thrown a tantrum or run away, but this time he chose to draw his sword to protect his servant instead. She looked Seonhak dead in the eye, her voice filled with absolute conviction as she declared that the young master had truly changed. Seonhak remained silent, processing her sincere words. Realizing the girl's loyalty was genuine, he turned to me and asked what martial art I had been practicing, and I told him I had only been cultivating the basic Heavenly Sun divine art. Seonhak held up 2 fingers, giving me a strict deadline of 2 months. He commanded me to defeat the top trainee of the clan within that time. Only then would he believe my change. He leaned in, his gaze piercing as he asked if I had the guts to accept his terms. I looked down, a wave of nostalgia washing over me as I remembered how he always used to test my limits in my past life. I looked up with a confident smirk, boldly telling him that 1 single month would be more than enough. Seonhak stared at me in silence, surprised by my sheer audacity. With a loud click, he firmly secured his sword back onto his belt. He turned around and walked away, accepting my counteroffer with a simple, "So be it." A victorious smirk spread across my face. I had officially secured my right to remain at the training grounds. I turned to Muryang and told her it was time to head back, catching her completely off guard. I laughed heartily, telling her I still needed to run a few more laps before the day was over. No rest for the weary. She smiled warmly and followed behind me as we watched Seonhak's grand figure disappear down the hall. Half a month passed by in a blur of sweat and determination, and I finally drew a real steel blade from its scabbard. I executed a perfect, incredibly sharp swing, the blade slicing through the air with unmatched speed and precision. Through relentless training, I had reached the 5th level of the Heavenly Sun divine art, completely melting away the stagnant energies inside my body. I looked down at my hands, wishing I had access to the high-level manuals in the library to clear the remaining internal blockages. Staring at my heavily calloused palm, I hoped my energy center would heal as quickly as my physical wounds. Nearby, a group of disciples were gossiping, their voices dripping with mockery. They joked about the upcoming match, laughing that the young master would probably run away since all he knew how to do was basic downward swings. I walked past them calmly, knowing my uncle had spread rumors of the duel specifically to pressure me into giving up. A smug disciple lounging in a chair laughed, mocking my basic training and comparing my sword forms to farm work. I stepped right up to them, looking down on the slouched boy with a cold, piercing gaze, asking him if he was the top trainee. He looked up, his smug grin faltering as he saw the sharp intensity in my eyes. He quickly recovered, mockingly introducing himself as the top trainee and promising to go easy on me during our match. I stared at his face, a sudden chill running down my spine as a sense of deep familiarity washed over me. He smirked, introducing himself as Lee Seoki. My eyes widened in absolute shock as the name echoed in my mind. I remembered him instantly. In my past life, he was slightly older and plumper, but it was undoubtedly the exact same man. This bastard was the vile traitor who leaked the Cheon family's secrets to the demonic cult, leading to our slaughter. I gritted my teeth in pure fury. I turned my back and walked away, swearing to remember his name, while he let out a mocking laugh behind me. My blood boiled with raw vengeance. I was originally planning to just do my best, but now I had a much better reason to crush him. I glared forward, my teeth grinding as I swore to make this treacherous bastard pay for the future he destroyed. Half a month later, the day of the match finally arrived, and the massive stone arena was packed with hundreds of spectators. The disciples in the crowd laughed and joked, eagerly waiting to watch the useless young master get completely demolished. The referee stepped forward, his booming voice instantly silencing the noisy stadium. He announced the start of the duel arranged by Grandmaster Cheon, calling for the fighters to step onto the stage. Seonhak sat majestically on his high throne, looking down on the arena with a cold, expectant gaze. Lee Seoki stepped onto the platform, confidently waving his wooden sword to the cheering crowd like a hero. The referee shouted my name, calling for the challenger to step forward. But the entrance remained completely empty, with only the wind blowing through the stone gates. The referee looked around, thoroughly confused by the lack of response. The crowd instantly erupted into whispers and mockery, laughing that the cowardly young master had probably fled the estate in fear. A soft, mocking chuckle broke through the silence. The entire stadium burst into hysterical laughter, mocking my absence and celebrating my predicted cowardice. Seonhak looked deeply disappointed, while Seoki stood on the stage with a triumphant, arrogant smirk. But a calm, commanding voice suddenly cut through the roaring laughter, announcing that Cheon Muryang had arrived. Seoki and Seonhak both snapped their heads toward the entrance, their eyes widening in pure shock. A tall, incredibly slender figure in elegant blue robes slowly climbed the stone steps, radiating a powerful, composed aura. The crowd went dead silent, the disciples whispering in absolute confusion as they tried to recognize this handsome stranger. In classical murim fashion, my physical transformation was a literal miracle. In the world of martial arts, purging your impurities through high-level energy cultivation is called marrow cleansing. It basically means sweating out all your bad qi, which somehow completely restructures your bones, melts away fat, and turns you into a chiseled runway model in a matter of weeks. Talk about a dream workout plan. I stepped onto the platform, my long hair blowing in the wind, revealing a lean, strikingly handsome face. I looked up at my opponent with cool, confident eyes, my hand resting on my hilt. The real battle was about to begin. The whispering in the crowd was deafening. Nobody could believe the lean, incredibly handsome warrior standing before them was the same lazy pig they had spent years mocking. I looked up at the high balcony, locking eyes with my uncle and the Grand Masters who had gathered to watch me fail. I offered a formal bow, apologizing for my delay as I prepared to face the clan's top trainee. My uncle looked down on me with his usual stern gaze, telling me to drop the empty courtesies and show him if I was actually prepared. I let out a confident smirk, spinning my wooden practice sword with effortless ease. I took my position, facing an opponent who was still completely oblivious to the monster standing right in front of him. Lee Seoki glared at me, highly irritated by my calm posture, firmly believing that a single month of training could never make up for a lifetime of laziness. He glanced up at the balcony, desperately trying to figure out what kind of game the Grandmaster was playing by arranging this match. Seeing the elite captains of the Sword Corps watching from above, a greedy spark ignited in his eyes. He smirked, raising his wooden weapon. He decided to use me as a stepping stone to leave a flashy impression on the clan's leadership. I could read him like an open book. I could practically hear the pathetic political schemes running through his mind. This slimy parasite had always relied on flattery and cheap politics to climb the ranks instead of putting real work into his training. I remembered him clearly from my past life, a smug, self-absorbed snake who managed to worm his way into the prestigious Heavenly Dragon Corps. He had spent his youth feeding the old foolish Muryang's ego, sweet-talking his way into positions of power he never deserved. And eventually, blinded by greed, he sold out every vital secret of our family to the demonic cult for gold. By the time I had discovered his treachery in my past life, the damage was already done and our home was burning. But today, I had the unique opportunity to pass the judgment I couldn't deliver before. He hadn't committed his treason yet, which was exactly why I had to destroy his future right here. So-hye kept his arrogant gaze fixed on me, still believing that everything in his life was going exactly according to plan. I let a quiet, dangerous smile slip across my face, thoroughly amused by his ignorance. I lowered my stance and pointed my wooden blade toward him, silently promising that his cheap career would end today. The referee's voice echoed through the arena, reminding us that the match would only end on his direct command. The entire stadium held its breath as we faced each other, the tension thick enough to cut. My uncle's booming voice sliced through the silence, ordering the match to begin. I lunged forward in an instant, kicking up dust as I closed the distance like a shadow. So-hye braced himself, ready to counter my head-on charge with a heavy defensive block. I leapt into the air, bringing my wooden sword down with immense calculated force. He smirked, recalling how easily I had disarmed Mu-myeong and prepared to overwhelm me before I could set up my defense. He spun his weapon with flashy, unnecessary movements, trying to intimidate me with his speed. But I was already descending upon him, my eyes locked onto the critical weakness in his form. He raised his sword to block, arrogantly daring me to try and knock his weapon away. He unleashed a heavy strike, expecting to break my guard in a single clash. Our wooden blades collided with a loud crack, wood splinters flying through the air. He smiled smugly, thinking he had successfully matched my power, while I kept my face perfectly neutral. He quickly ducked low, sliding beneath my strike to execute a fast, low counterattack. He spun behind my back, aiming a swift strike at my exposed blind spot. I barely managed to twist my body in time, the blunt force of his sword grazing my ribs with a painful thud. I staggered slightly, and So-hye's smile widened as he realized he had the upper hand. He decided to completely abandon mercy to show off for the masters. He grabbed my arm, attempting to lock me in place so I couldn't dodge his next move. With a hard twist, he knocked my wooden sword completely out of my hand, leaving me defenseless. He drove his elbow hard into my chest, the brutal impact threatening to crack my ribs. I was sent flying backward, my boots sliding heavily across the dusty floor. I struggled to catch my breath, pretending to be in deep distress to lure him into a false sense of security. He watched me struggle, a triumphant, malicious grin spreading across his face as he began to gather his internal energy. A vibrant, glowing pink aura began to crackle around his wooden sword. In martial arts stories, energy projection usually reveals your alignment, and apparently, our future ruthless traitor possesses the combat aura of a magical girl. He told me to watch closely, wanting to make sure I felt the absolute despair of our difference in strength. With a loud shout, he unleashed a sweeping wave of energy that tore up the ground as it raced toward me. The devastating blast of aura hit me head-on, completely engulfing the arena in a blinding flash of pink light. He chuckled quietly, arrogant enough to believe he had just secured a flawless victory. The dust slowly began to settle, leaving him standing proudly with his back turned to where I lay. He looked up at the golden balcony, eagerly awaiting the roaring applause of the Grand Masters. He raised his fist high into the air, celebrating his perfect win. He let out a loud shout of triumph, thoroughly pleased with how perfectly his plan had worked out. But as the seconds ticked by, he was met with nothing but dead silence. His smile slowly faded. Why wasn't anyone cheering? Suddenly, his vision began to tilt, the entire training ground seemingly falling onto its side. He blinked in dazed confusion, drool slowly dripping from his mouth as his brain struggled to process what was happening. He looked up from the dirt, his eyes widening in pure horror as he saw a dark boot step right next to his face. I was standing right over him, completely untouched by his attack. He stammered out my name in absolute shock. I smiled coolly, looking down at his pathetic state, and asked, "Did you enjoy your little nap?" He lay flat on the cold stone, his head spinning as he tried to figure out why on earth he was the one lying in the dirt. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs refused to respond, completely paralyzed by the shock of my strike. His eyes drifted to the floor, his heart dropping as he realized what had happened. Lying just inches away from him was his own wooden sword, shattered into clean pieces. His dilated pupil reflected the sudden, terrifying memory of the final exchange. He finally remembered. As he had charged forward with his flashy aura strike, I had moved with a speed that defied human sight. My wooden blade met his with absolute crushing precision, shattering his weapon in a single devastating impact. The shattered tip of his sword flew past his face, completely exposing his guard. He had stared at me in sheer terror, realizing too late that my movements were on an entirely different level. Wood splinters rained down on us as I bypassed his defense completely. In midair, I delivered a lightning-fast, brutal pommel strike directly to his temple. The blunt impact landed with brain-rattling force, completely switching off his consciousness before his body even hit the ground. I flipped over his falling body with flawless grace, landing perfectly on my feet as he crashed into the dirt. He lay there, the painful truth finally settling into his dazed mind. He had been completely, utterly defeated in a single move. I stood over his limp body, looking down on the pathetic traitor who had once brought my entire clan to its knees. I leaned in close, whispering, "A slimy turncoat like you has no place in this family." He could only mutter in dazed confusion. I stood back up, warning him that I was letting him off easy today, but that I would be keeping a very close eye on his every move from now on. He tried to salvage his ruined pride, desperately telling himself that he had only lost because he let his guard down, but tears of shame welled in his eyes as he realized the devastating reality of his situation, his reputation, his plans, and his standing with the Grand Masters. Everything he had spent years scheming for was completely ruined. The spectators in the stands were completely speechless, unable to comprehend how the clan's top trainee had just been knocked out in a single exchange. In the corner of the arena, Muryang clutched my legendary heavenly light sword, tears of immense pride streaming down her cheeks. I turned my gaze toward the balcony, looking directly at my uncle to see his reaction. Cheon let out a low, thoughtful grunt, his arms crossed over his chest as he processed my incredible display of skill. I stood tall and calm in the center of the stadium, waiting for his official announcement. My uncle stared back, his expression completely unreadable, but his eyes held a new, profound respect for me. I offered a subtle, confident smirk, letting him know that this was only the beginning of my journey. The silence in the arena was absolute as the crowd waited for the Grand Master to speak. In the stands, a bitter disciple clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white, his body shaking with pure jealousy. He grumbled in anger, furious that so-hye had failed so miserably and ruined their perfect chance to kick me out of the family. He ground his teeth in sheer frustration, unable to accept that the useless young master was now the strongest trainee. The memory of that flawless mid-air strike still hung in the air, leaving a lingering chill over the entire training ground. So-hye lay completely motionless on the cold stone, his shattered sword a silent testament to his utter defeat. I stood over him with a calm, composed expression, my heart lightened by the small taste of vengeance. Uncle Cheon remained seated on his high throne, staring down at me in heavy, thoughtful silence. The crowd finally broke their silence, a wave of stunned whispers washing over the stands as they tried to figure out if I had used some sort of trick. I looked up with a cool, slightly arrogant posture, letting them whisper whatever excuses they needed to cope with their shock. Cheon closed his eyes, deeply reflecting on the undeniable talent I had just displayed. He stood up to announce my victory, but before he could speak, I raised my voice, cutting through the stadium to address the entire crowd. My uncle paused, his eyes narrowing in surprise as I took command of the arena. I looked at the sea of disciples and loudly declared, "I know how much you all despise me, and I admit that my past actions were completely indefensible." On the balcony, my uncle listened intently, while Muryang stared at me with wide, emotional eyes, deeply moved by my words. I looked at the crowd, honestly admitting, I do not even remember the faces of everyone I have hurt in the past. I knew those sins belonged to the old rotten Muryang, but since I now occupied this body, I was fully prepared to bear the weight of his punishment. I stood alone in the center of the arena, the shadows of the past finally starting to clear. I clenched my fists tight, feeling the powerful, solid energy of my new path. I turned my back to the crowd and proudly announced my name to the world. I yelled out a sincere apology to the entire training ground, asking for their forgiveness for all the pain and trouble the old Muryang had caused. And then, right in front of hundreds of shocked spectators, the grand young master of the Cheon clan bowed deeply, showing absolute humility. A dead, stunned silence fell over the entire stadium. Nobody had ever seen a noble heir lower themselves to common disciples like this. The trainees stared in a daze, their deep-seated anger slowly melting away, replaced by a profound, silent respect. Wuxia watched from the sidelines, clutching my sword to her chest as tears of pure pride and happiness streamed down her face. Even my stern uncle looked completely taken aback, his jaw slightly slack as he witnessed my incredible growth in character. I straightened my posture, standing tall and proud before the silent crowd. I issued a final challenge, declaring, "If anyone is still unsatisfied or holds a grudge, you are welcome to come and face me in the training grounds anytime." I promised them that from this day forward, I would always be right here, ready to face them head on. I turned around and began to walk off the field, my head held high. My uncle watched my retreating back, a heavy silence hanging over him as he realized the boy he once despised had finally become a true leader. I called Wuxia to follow me, exiting the arena as the grandest chapter of my new life officially began. Xianxia rested his chin in his hand, a deep, intrigued hum vibrating in his chest as he contemplated my request. The next morning was bright and clear as Wuxia and I walked back through the quiet corridors. I thanked her for guarding my heavenly light sword, and she admitted that carrying it had given her a sense of comfort. I smiled, stretching out my hand and asking her to return it so I could carry it myself, but she flinched back, looking genuinely upset. She hugged the sword scabbard tightly to her flushed cheek, cutely begging to keep holding it a little longer, calling the legendary blade her little heaven. She is literally cuddling a weapon of mass destruction as if it were a teddy bear. I sweat dropped, utterly speechless by her behavior, when a familiar, stern voice suddenly cut through the air, asking, "What did you seek to cut during your match?" I spun around in surprise, my warrior senses instantly on high alert. Grandmaster Xianxia was standing at the end of the corridor, his crimson cloak draped majestically over his shoulders. A nostalgic smile touched my lips. I had heard those exact words from him in my past life, and hearing them again was deeply comforting. He walked closer, demanding to know if I was going to answer his question about the true purpose of my swordplay. I looked up at the vast blue sky, a bright, genuine smile on my face as I proudly told him, "My sword seeks to cut the very heavens." Xianxia's eyes widened in absolute shock, a cold sweat breaking on his brow as he muttered how absurd my answer was. He was completely stunned. Cutting the sky was the ultimate secret path of the sword he had pursued his entire life, yet the only person who understood it was the nephew he had once despised. He let out a soft sigh, officially acknowledging my victory and telling me to name whatever reward I wanted. I immediately requested entry to the Heavenly Dragon Library, but he raised a hand to stop me, explaining that it was unfortunately beyond his authority to grant. I tapped my chin, quickly brainstorming an alternative that would still allow me to grow stronger. My eyes lit up with a brilliant idea, and I asked for permission to spar with one trainee per day instead. Xianxia looked at me in disbelief, surprised that I was asking for something so simple and demanding. I smiled, explaining that there was simply no better way to train than real live combat. He stared at me intensely, his respect for my dedication reaching a whole new level. He turned to leave, a small, approving nod on his face as he promised that I would get stronger every day under his arrangement. I bowed respectfully, thanking him for his guidance and looking forward to the challenges ahead. He walked away, leaving me and Wuxia to prepare for the grueling training that was about to begin. Wuxia tilted her head, curiously asking what cutting the sky meant, and I laughed softly, telling her it was a secret only the Grand Master and I shared. The next morning arrived, the bright sunlight illuminating the vast training grounds of the estate. A heavy stomp kicked up dust as a bulkier disciple marched through the dirt, cursing under his breath. He roared in frustration, furious that I had requested daily sparring matches and was acting so arrogant just because of a lucky win against so-hye. He stood tall, his massive back tensing with rage, before a dark, malicious grin spread across his face as he realized this worked out perfectly for him. He reached down, his scarred fingers wrapping around his hilt. He slowly drew a real, dangerously sharp steel blade, his eyes cold and focused. He stared at his reflection in the gleaming steel, the jagged scar running across his cheek a constant reminder of his burning hatred. He remembered the dark, rainy night at a tavern years ago when the old, spoiled Muryang had been violently throwing a tantrum. Drunk and reckless, the young master had waved a real sword around, terrorizing innocent people and screaming about his absolute authority. The bystanders had scrambled for cover, while the other disciples watched from a nearby table, too terrified of Muryang's status to intervene. But this scarred trainee, who had been a clean-faced newbie back then, had refused to stand by and watch someone get hurt. Drunk Muryang had swung his blade wildly, raging like a madman at anyone who dared to look at him. The poor tavern owner had screamed for help as Muryang's sword sliced through the air. The steel blade flashed through the dim light of the tavern with a deadly, whistling sound. And with a brutal, reckless slash, the sword carved deep into the young trainee's face, leaving a permanent mark of his cruelty. The young man fell to his knees in agony, clutching his face as the damage was done. Young Master Muryang had stood over him, stomping on his chest and mockingly calling him an idiot for getting in his way. The trainee had clutched his face, his heart filling with a deep, poisonous hatred as he stared up at his attacker. The drunk heir had merely laughed it off, tossing a coin and accusing the boy of trying to scam him before walking away. Back in the present, the scarred veteran stared at his reflection, his teeth grinding with absolute murderous rage. He grinned wickedly, promising to exact his revenge and leave the exact same scar on my face, pretending it was just a simple accident during our sparring match. My first opponent was Cha Myung-hak, and he was coming for my blood. How do you fix a life that was broken from the very start? You pick up a sword, face the ghosts of your past, and refuse to let them pull you under. High above the courtyard, Muryang leaps into the open sky, his blade cutting a sharp silhouette against the towering pagodas. He hovers in midair for a fraction of a second, his focus locked entirely on his form. Every single line of his body is perfectly balanced, showing the intense, exhausting training he has put himself through to reshape his physical frame. With a sudden rush of wind, he drives his practice sword downward, his movements fluid and precise. This is definitely not the clumsy, spoiled heir everyone used to look down on. This is the awakening of a true master. At the edge of the training grounds, a massive figure stands in silence, watching the display. It's Cha Myung-hak, the scarred veteran who has spent years nursing a bitter, toxic grudge against the young master. Myung-hak's face twists in anger, his teeth grinding as he watches Muryang ignore his presence. He was dragged out here for an official sparring match, yet the young lord doesn't even deign to look at him. Determined to turn this match into a bloody lesson, Myung-hak prepares his weapon. But the calm sound of tea being poured nearby suddenly cuts through his dark thoughts. Woo-young steps forward with a gentle smile, carrying a tray of warm tea and sweet pastries. She politely asks the scarred warrior to wait, explaining that once Muryang starts training, he completely loses all sense of his surroundings. Myung-hak stares at her, immediately recognizing her as the maid who stood up to a dangerous bully just a few weeks ago. He is stunned to see her acting so calmly in front of him. Her pink eyes are clear and peaceful as she places the tray down, showing none of the fear or hesitation that usually plagues the servants of this household. The scarred warrior looks down at her, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck as he feels the strange, quiet confidence radiating from this young woman. Taking a bite of a pastry, Myung-hak skeptically asks if the young master really trains like this every single day, and Woo-young confirms it without a trace of doubt. Her expression turns slightly wistful as she looks toward the field, admitting that while she is glad he is finally working hard, she constantly worries he might push his body past its absolute limits. Myung-hak finds it hard to believe his ears, demanding to know why she cares so much about a spoiled brat who used to torment her and everyone else in the clan. Woo-young takes a slow sip of her tea, calmly acknowledging that the young master indeed made countless terrible mistakes in the past, but she insists with absolute certainty that he has changed. Her face shines with a deep, unbreakable trust as she declares that she believes in the kindness hidden within the young lord's heart. Myung-hak quietly drinks his tea, forced to admit to himself that the young master's physical transformation and sudden discipline are impossible to deny. He turns his focus back to the training field, watching Muryang repeat the same basic jump and slash motion over and over again. At first glance, it looks like simple practice, but as he watches closer, Myung-hak's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as he notices the perfect placement of Muryang's sliding foot. The height of the leap, the angle of the blade, the tight grip of his fingers. Every single repetition is an exact, terrifying copy of the last, executed with flawless precision. It dawns on the veteran that this isn't random practice. Muryang is projecting a phantom opponent in his mind, fighting a detailed battle with every single swing. A cold chill runs down Myung-hak's spine as he realizes the horrifying truth of what he is witnessing. Muryang is simulating a direct fight against him, reading his movements and striking his blind spots before they even cross blades. In his mind's eye, Myung-hak can almost feel the cold steel of Muryang's blade grazing past his neck, a phantom strike that leaves him completely paralyzed. He stands frozen on the stone steps, gasping for air as if he had already lost his life in a split second of combat. The realization is utterly crushing. Muryang hasn't even stepped onto the arena, and he has already dismantled Myung-hak's entire style in his head. When you get mentally checkmated by a guy who is just doing solo warm-ups, it is a clear sign you should probably stick to tea drinking. Muryang suddenly lands gracefully, breathing softly as he notices his guest and politely apologizes for keeping him waiting. Standing tall in his fitted blue uniform, Muryang looks incredibly sharp and composed, greeting the scarred warrior by his full name. Myung-hak is stunned, staring back with wide eyes, completely shocked that the high and mighty heir even knows his name. Muryang offers a gentle, humble smile, explaining that since Myung-hak will one day become a key martial artist of their clan, he is trying to memorize everyone's name. The idea that the lazy, selfish heir actually wants to acknowledge and value every single trainee leaves the veteran utterly speechless. Muryang's eyes drift to the deep, jagged scar on Myung-hak's cheek, and he quietly asks if he was the one who caused that terrible injury. Myung-hak's face darkens as he confirms the truth, the memory of that drunken, abusive night flashing behind his eyes. Muryang sighs inwardly, realizing this was another heavy debt left behind by the body's previous owner, a debt he must now pay. Without a single excuse, Muryang bows his head deeply, offering a sincere, heartfelt apology for a painful mistake that can never be undone. The sight of the future patriarch bowing in genuine humility to a common trainee sends a wave of absolute shock through the courtyard. Myung-hak thinks back to the arrogant monster who only knew how to abuse others, realizing that the maid's words were entirely true. The man standing before him is completely different. Placing his teacup back on the tray with a quiet tap, the veteran struggles with his own pride and the sudden dissolution of his hatred. To everyone's surprise, Myung-hak loudly declares his defeat before a single blow is struck, turning to walk away from the arena. He stops to look back, promising that next time he will train twice as hard and challenge the young lord properly, with his pride fully intact. Muryang and Wolyang can only watch in confusion as the intimidating warrior walks off the field with his head held high. Muryang lets out a small, amused breath, wondering aloud if his apology was actually accepted by the stubborn veteran. Wolyang smiles softly, teasing him by saying Myung-hak certainly didn't look like he was smiling, though the heavy tension in the air has completely evaporated. Muryang's expression turns serious as he addresses his loyal maid, preparing her for the monumental task ahead. He asks her to write down every single evil deed and mistake his past self ever committed, wanting to face his sins head-on without hiding anything. Though surprised by the unusual request, Wolyang agrees, her eyes shining with deep respect for her master's desire to redeem himself. For Muryang, correcting the mistakes of the past is the absolute starting point for building a future worth fighting for. It's a heavy burden to carry, but he accepts it fully as Cheon Muryang, as the daily sparring matches continue under the burning colors of the sunset. The very next day, another angry trainee charges forward with a wooden sword, shouting that the young master must pay for his past arrogance. But Muryang effortlessly leaps into the air, his movements so fast and light that he easily evades the aggressive strike. With a swift, precise counterattack, Muryang strikes the trainee's guard, sending him crashing onto the hard wooden deck. He stands over his opponent, offering a polite hand and thanking him for the valuable match, leaving the young warrior completely stunned. Trainee after trainee falls in a single devastating strike, yet they all walk away grumbling and nursing their pride, claiming they only lost because they let their guard down. Wolyang happily marks another victory on a wooden tally board, playfully sticking her tongue out as she keeps track of her master's perfect record. A senior martial artist watches from the sidelines, his face lined with deep contemplation as he witnesses the undeniable rise of a genius. One of the defeated trainees rubs his sore shoulder, remembering the bloated, clumsy fool Muryang used to be, and realizing that making excuses is entirely useless now. With a heavy sigh, he turns and walks away from the training grounds, thoroughly humbled by the massive gap in their abilities. By the time the official sparring period draws to a close, Muryang's perfect, undefeated record remains completely unbroken, but inside the quiet, secluded chambers of his estate, a different, far more dangerous battle is taking place. Muryang sits in deep meditation, a swirling vortex of blue spiritual energy crackling around his body as he tries to refine his chi. Despite successfully reaching the 7th star of his divine cultivation art, he finds himself completely blocked by a stubborn mass of cold yin energy. This poisonous energy blocks his major pathways, threatening to tear his meridians apart if he tries to force the flow of his spiritual power. He opens his glowing purple eyes, sweat dripping down his face as he exhales a long, exhausted breath. He realizes that a basic cultivation method won't be enough to melt this blockage. He must somehow gain access to the clan's sacred library to find a higher level technique. As he sits on his wooden bed, a sudden uneasy feeling washes over him, as if he has forgotten something incredibly important. His eyes go wide with panic as he leaps to his feet. Today is the exact day the patriarch, his late savior and benefactor, returns to the estate. The great man who rescued him from the cold, brutal streets is finally coming back, and Muryang desperately wants to see him. Dressing quickly, he stands tall and elegant, flowing peach-colored robes, looking like a dignified young lord of a grand martial family. He looks at his reflection, a wave of complex emotions washing over him as he wonders if he can truly bring himself to call this great man his father. Suddenly, a panicked, frantic voice screams his name from outside, shattering his thoughts. A young maid named Hua Hong runs up to him, gasping for air, her face pale as she cries out that Wuryang is in terrible danger. Tears stream down her face as she explains that the young master's terrifying fiancée has just cornered Wuryang in the main courtyard. Muryang's heart drops. He never expected her to arrive so early, and he knows exactly how ruthless she can be. In the central courtyard, a plate of expensive food lies shattered and scattered across the cold stone floor, stained with dark grease. Wuryang lies on the ground, trembling in sheer terror as she stares at a pair of exquisite silk boots standing right in front of her. She frantically begs for mercy, surrounded by several heavily armed imposing guards who look down at her with cold indifference. Standing above her is a woman of breathtaking but chilling beauty, wearing a heavy, ornate silver headdress and looking down with pure disdain. And now, for some reason, we suddenly cut to a cooking show. Look at this freshly cooked fried rice. I guess the author wanted to make sure we knew the kitchen staff was working hard while a crisis was unfolding outside. The head cook grins with satisfaction, clearly very proud of his culinary masterpiece. Beside him, an assistant chef swiftly slices fresh cucumbers, keeping the kitchen running like a well-oiled machine. Dynamic cucumber slicing during a life-or-death crisis. Truly a vital detail. Back in the courtyard, Wuryang is completely trapped, kneeling in the center of a hostile circle of elite warriors belonging to the Sichuan Dang clan. Sweat and tears drip down her face as she presses her forehead against the cold stone, paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of the guards. The icy voice of the ice flower, Dang So-hye, cuts through the quiet courtyard, declaring that a simple apology will never wash the stain out of her expensive dress. Hiding her face behind a beautiful silk fan, she coldly orders her guards to execute the clumsy maid according to the strict laws of the Dang clan. Ah yes, the ultimate sin. Minor dress damage, a crime clearly worthy of immediate public execution. The lead bodyguard nods slowly, his dark eyes glinting with a ruthless, sadistic intent. He slowly draws his long blade from its scabbard, the sharp ring of steel echoing through the tense courtyard. Raising the sword high above his head, he prepares to deliver a fatal blow to the helpless maid trembling at his feet. From the distance, Hua Hong screams in absolute horror, desperately running forward in a futile attempt to stop the execution. The blade begins its deadly descent, slicing through the air with terrifying lethal speed. Suddenly, a flash of white and peach robes cuts through the space, and a deafening clash of metal rings out as Muryang blocks the strike with his practice sword. The lead guard and so-hye gasp in genuine shock, completely startled by the sudden, powerful intervention. Muryang stands firm between the executioner and the trembling maid, his eyes burning with a quiet, lethal fury. The surrounding guards instantly draw their weapons, pointing a wall of sharp steel directly at the intruder. Muryang demands to know what they think they are doing in his home, while Wuryang looks up at him in utter disbelief. The lead guard steps forward, angrily demanding to know who dares to interfere with the official business of the great Dang clan. Turning his head slightly, his eyes cold and sharp, he calmly declares his identity. I am Cheon Muryang, the first son of the Cheon clan. Hearing his name, the guards hesitate, and So-hye slowly lowers her fan, a calculated smile playing on her lips as she greets her fiancé. She introduces herself as Dang So-hye, her beautiful eyes narrowing as she analyzes the lean, handsome man standing before her. Muryang's blood runs cold. In his past life, this beautiful, deadly woman was his wife, the merciless ice flower who orchestrated his clan's downfall. In typical Murim lore, the Sichuan Dang clan is famous for two things: gorgeous, cold-hearted women and enough hidden poison to wipe out a small country. Basically, the worst people to invite to a family dinner. She offers a warm, polite smile, but her eyes remain completely dead and empty, hiding the venomous snake waiting beneath. Muryang recalls how his late father proposed this marriage alliance, hoping the Dang clan's master medicine could heal Muryang's poisoned, broken body. The Dang clan readily accepted, seeing the marriage as the perfect stepping stone to expand their poisonous influence into the Central Plains. That was why she calmly accepted a husband who was a bloated, drunken mess on their very first wedding night, completely unbothered by his state. After a lightning-fast wedding, she slowly manipulated the patriarch, exploiting his vulnerability to gain absolute control over the family's secrets. They used the Cheon clan ruthlessly, expanding their power across the region while slowly hollowing out Muryang's family from the inside. He looks at her, realizing with absolute clarity that this very marriage was the true catalyst for his clan's total destruction. His voice turns to ice as he repeats his question, demanding to know what they are doing in his home. She casually gestures to her stained white cloak, completely unbothered by the heavy tension in the air. She claims she was simply punishing a lowly, clumsy maid who dared to ruin her expensive ceremonial dress. Muryang points out the absolute madness of trying to murder a servant of his household over a minor, accidental spill. She mockingly suggests that perhaps the young master only has eyes for his maid and lacks the taste to appreciate the value of fine garments. Her tone turns sharp and cold as she defends her actions, claiming the maid could have been an assassin, and they must follow the Dang clan's laws. Muryang snaps, shouting that this is the Cheon clan, and here they follow his family's laws and no one else's. He draws his practiced sword fully, declaring her actions and her words a direct, unforgivable insult to his people. The guards step forward in unison as So-hye warns him that a law doesn't lose its authority just because they crossed a border. She challenges him to try and stop them as her lead bodyguard steps forward, unleashing a terrifying aura of crimson sword chi, true sword energy glowing like a very expensive red glow stick. This is going to be a tough fight. Muryang's eyes widen slightly as he feels the immense pressure of true sword chi, realizing he is facing a genuine master. The guard lunges with blinding speed, and their blades meet in a deafening clash of metal and spiritual energy. The sheer force of the impact sends shockwaves through Muryang's arms, pushing him back across the stone tiles. Wolyang watches in horror while So-hye looks on with a smug, calculated gaze behind her fan. She slowly pulls a long silver needle from her hair, ready to strike if the fight doesn't go her way. The needle gleams in the sunlight, its tip coated in a silent, deadly poison. The guard unleashes a relentless flurry of strikes, his blades spinning in a deadly, blinding arc of light. Sparks fly in all directions as Muryang desperately blocks every blow, the ground beneath them cracking from the impact. He realizes this bodyguard is exceptionally strong, easily a first-class master warrior of the martial world. Their swords collide once more, a bright flash of light illuminating the entire courtyard. Muryang notes that while their basic swordsmanship might be equal, he is being completely overwhelmed by the guard's superior internal energy. Knowing he can't win a battle of raw power, he shifts his stance, preparing to utilize his specialized stealth techniques. He lunges forward, staying incredibly low to the ground like a predator tracking its prey. Against a master of mystical arts, basic, straightforward moves are entirely useless. He aims his blade directly at the opponent's weapon, exploiting a tiny split-second opening. He executes a flawless defensive counter, utilizing the sword of subtle arts. The strategy is simple, but dangerous. Don't target the opponent, target his blade and disarm him. The moment the guard's sword enters his range, he prepares to snatch it away. With a blinding flash, he unleashes the Dragon's Claw technique. A massive collision echoes through the courtyard as their weapons lock in a struggle of pure strength. But to Muryang's absolute horror, his grip suddenly slips, and his own sword is violently torn from his hands. The practice sword clatters onto the stone floor, leaving Muryang completely disarmed and vulnerable. He realizes his blocked meridians limited his power too much. Even a god-tier technique cannot overcome such a massive gap in internal energy. So-hye steps forward, mockingly praising his dedication to a mere servant girl. She leans in close, whispering, "I look forward to seeing you at the banquet tonight. I hope you will be a bit more cooperative then." As the Dang clan walks away, Hwahong runs forward with a scream of terror, holding a completely unresponsive Wolyang in her arms. Muryang's eyes widen in sheer horror as he looks at his loyal maid's pale, breathless face. Sarcasm is completely gone now. The situation has turned incredibly dark. Walking away, So-hye realizes Muryang is far more dangerous than the rumors suggested. She must secure this marriage to save her clan's plans. She quietly asks her lead bodyguard for his honest assessment of the young lord's true strength. The guard smugly states that while his skills are decent, his internal energy is weak, and 2 of his men could easily handle him. She coldly orders him to send 4 men instead, wanting to ensure Muryang is physically unable to show his face at the banquet tonight. Back in the courtyard, Muryang desperately cradles Wolyang, begging her to open her eyes. Checking her breathing and her pulse, he realizes with a sinking heart that she has been poisoned with a deadly Dang clan toxin. He looks back at the spilled food on the floor, realizing they poisoned the very meal she was bringing to him. She had taken a bite to test it. He remembers her bright, beautiful smile from earlier, always looking out for him and carrying his meals with joy. The memory of her warmth twists into a burning, venomous rage as he grinds his teeth in absolute anger. Gathering her in his arms, he dashes through the courtyard, his face contorted with desperation and fury. He orders Hwahong to guard his sword as he runs to find a physician, his footsteps pounding heavily against the stone. Watching from behind a pillar, a sneaky trainee wonders if he should report this chaos to Nong-ryeo-woon, sensing the massive storm that is about to hit the clan. A silent shadow of death has settled over the medicine rooms of the Cheon clan. The air is heavy with the scent of bitter herbs and impending tragedy, making the simple wooden shelves feel incredibly cold. Muryang stands in absolute silence, watching the clan's physicians scramble around the room. The lead doctor steps back with a heavy sigh, explaining that they have only been able to apply temporary treatment to keep her heart beating. Holding a silver acupuncture needle, the physician's hand trembles as he admits that while he can slow the spread of the toxin, curing it is entirely out of the question. On the bed, Wolyang lies pale and unresponsive. Dark, poisonous veins are starting to snake their way up her arms, and without the Dang clan's specific antidote, she won't survive the night. Muryang stares down at her, his face a mask of cold stone. The sheer helplessness of the situation triggers a dark, familiar rage deep within his soul. With a sharp turn of his heel, Muryang instructs Hwahong to stay by Wolyang's side, his voice carrying a quiet, dangerous edge. Hwahong looks up in panic, asking him where he could possibly be going when his loyal maid is on the verge of death. Muryang pauses at the doorway, looking back over his shoulder as he coldly notes that there is a grand banquet tonight, and it wouldn't be right for the eldest son to miss it. His eyes burn with a terrifying lavender glow as he grinds his teeth, promising himself that he is going to show the Dang clan the absolute worst, most destructive piece of trash they have ever encountered. Meanwhile, deep within the corridors of the main estate, Grandmaster Xianxia walks in silence, his heavy red cloak billowing behind him. Xianxia's face is lined with worry as he contemplates his brother's foolishness. Bringing the poison expert Dang clan into their home is like inviting a tiger that will eventually swallow them whole. Suddenly, he stops dead in his tracks, his sharp eyes shifting toward the window as a massive, suffocating wave of killing intent washes over the estate. The aura is so thick and dark that Seonhak can almost feel it pressing against his skin, originating from the secluded bamboo forest nearby. Stepping out into the open, Seonhak looks toward the dense grove, demanding to know who could possibly be releasing such a raw, untamed storm of violence. Deep in the forest, a flock of black birds screeches in panic, scattering into the sky as a series of deafening cracks echoes through the trees. Muryang is there, his face drenched in sweat as he grips his practice sword, his muscles tense to their absolute limit. With a series of blinding, chaotic slashes, he tears through the thick bamboo stalks, wood splinters flying in all directions as he vents his suffocating fury. He spins and strikes with reckless abandon, completely unaware that his uncle is standing just a few paces away, quietly observing him. Seonhak stands with his arms crossed, his face expressionless as he analyzes the young man's frantic technique. He notes that this stance is entirely different from the elegant sky-severing forms taught by the clan. Those forms are meant to rise above the heavens. Instead, this is a raw, murderous blade designed solely to slaughter men, fueled by nothing but absolute wrath and an intense desire to tear his enemies apart. Seonhak frowns, realizing that if Muryang continues down this path, the sheer intensity of his own rage will eventually consume his mind and destroy his spirit. With a primal scream, Muryang raises his sword high above his head, channeling every ounce of his boiling anger into one final desperate strike. The blade drives downward with a massive boom, splitting a giant bamboo trunk clean down the middle as the ground trembles. The split trunk crashes to the dirt, kicking up a thick cloud of dust and dry leaves into the forest air. Muryang stands hunched over, gasping for breath, his chest heaving as the adrenaline slowly begins to drain from his body. Slow, deliberate footsteps approach, and Seonhak's voice cuts through the quiet, dryly asking if his grand goal of cutting the heavens has reduced him to taking his anger out on helpless trees. Standing tall above him, the Grand Master demands to know what has driven him into such a dangerous, self-destructive fury. Muryang keeps his back turned, his shoulders tensing as he refuses to show the vulnerability and pain hidden behind his anger. He quietly admits that he is simply too weak, and because of his lack of power, he keeps failing to protect the people he cares about. Seonhak's eyes narrow, demanding to know who exactly this selfish, arrogant heir considers to be his people. Muryang turns his head slightly, his profile sharp against the sunlight, as he softly answers that his people are the ones he wishes to cherish and protect. With a firm, resonant voice, he declares that his people are the entirety of the Cheon clan, leaving the formidable Grand Master completely stunned. Seonhak stands in silence, remembering the fat, useless boy who once begged him for scraps of attention. He realizes Muryang didn't mean those who serve him, but rather those he wishes to serve. A faint, rare smile tugs at Seonhak's lips under his heavy beard as he quietly admits to himself that he was far too narrow-minded in his judgment of the boy. With a grand gesture, Seonhak draws his massive steel sword, reminding Muryang of his boast that he could copy any technique simply by seeing it once. He challenges the young lord to prove those arrogant words right here and now, his eyes flashing with a competitive spark. Muryang looks back in surprise, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion as he looks at his uncle's drawn weapon. Seonhak explains that while the Dragon's Claw is a technique he passed down to the elite units, he created a secret follow-up move that he has never taught to another living soul. His face turns incredibly stern, bathed in a sudden, intense pink aura of concentrated spiritual energy as he asks if Muryang has the courage to learn it. He warns him that this technique is designed to show the world exactly what happens when someone dares to touch the dragon's reverse scale. In ancient Chinese mythology, a dragon has a single inverted scale on its throat, and touching it triggers an ungodly, apocalyptic wrath. This technique is basically that exact feeling, put into a sword. With a deafening roar of energy, Seonhak lunges forward, his entire body enveloped in a massive, swirling vortex of absolute destructive power. Muryang is forced back by the sheer wind pressure, his eyes wide with awe as he witnesses the legendary demonstration. Seonhak unleashes the reverse scale slash, his sword cutting through the air with a blinding crescent-shaped wave of pure kinetic force. The impact is so massive that a giant swirling vortex of wind and dust shoots up into the sky, visible from miles away across the estate. In a nearby courtyard, several trainees stop their practice, staring up at the massive energy storm in utter disbelief. The disguised Dang clan assassins quickly turn their heads away, urging each other to focus on hiding their gear before the banquet begins. One of the infiltrators holds up a small glass vial containing a clear, paralyzing liquid, noting that this poison will make Muryang look like he passed out from extreme drinking. The lead infiltrator snickers, confident that no one in the estate will believe the word of a notorious piece of trash, even if he claims he was attacked. Back in the ruined clearing, Muryang stands with his clothes torn by the sheer wind pressure, looking at the absolute devastation around him. He quietly asks his uncle if he was really planning to kill his own nephew with a strike that powerful. Looking at the massive trench carved into the forest floor and the shattered bamboo, Muryang is deeply shaken by the terrifying destructive power of the technique. Seonhak sheathes his sword with a satisfying click, demanding to know if Muryang has truly understood the core difference between this move and the basic Dragon's Claw. He explains that when a swordsman achieves perfect unity with his weapon, he begins to subconsciously perceive the blade as a natural extension of his own physical body. The Grand Master illustrates his point by recalling how an arrogant warrior thrusts his blade forward with absolute confidence, thinking it can never be separated from his hands. But the Dragon's Claw exploits that very illusion, shattering that sense of security by violently tearing the weapon away in an instant. Muryang listens intently, swallowing hard as he begins to grasp the profound psychological layer hidden behind the advanced martial art. Seonhak admits that the basic Dragon's Claw is far from perfect, and it will fail against a master of a completely different caliber, just like the bodyguard Muryang faced earlier. But he reveals that there is a deeper, far more complex illusion that even the most seasoned master warriors will inevitably fall for. He looks at Muryang, asking him directly if his tactical mind can deduce what that illusion is. Muryang's eyes light up with a sudden, brilliant realization as he answers that the secret lies in the heaven of the reverse scale slash. Seonhak nods in approval, his voice booming as he asks the young lord if he truly has the capacity to execute it. Looking at the ruined tree trunks, Muryang honestly admits that reaching absolute mastery over such a profound concept in a single day is impossible, but he flashes a sharp, confident smirk, promising his uncle that he will absolutely pull it off before the grand banquet begins tonight. Seonhak's face remains stern, his tone turning incredibly solemn as he clarifies that he isn't asking about the sword technique, he is asking if Muryang is truly ready to protect the Cheon clan. The question hangs heavily in the air, striking Muryang right in the center of his resolve. His lips curve into a wide, completely fearless smile, the fire of his determination burning brighter than ever before. Standing tall amidst the ruins of the forest, Muryang confidently declares that he is going to make it happen, no matter what it takes. Seonhak lets out a rare grunt of satisfaction, gently patting the hilt of his sheathed sword as he accepts the answer. He suddenly glances toward the dark trees, his voice dropping to a whisper as he notes that the air has turned foul due to some dirty rats hiding nearby. With a final nod, the Grand Master turns and walks back toward the estate, leaving Muryang alone to handle the unwanted guests. Muryang watches him go, his smile fading into a cold, predatory look as his hand slowly drifts down to the hilt of his weapon. His eyes narrow into sharp slits of pure lethal focus as he whispers to himself, wondering if it's time to go and hunt down these hidden pests. From the safety of the thick brush, the three disguised Dangclan assassins watch him, completely unaware that they have just transitioned from hunters to prey. The lead assassin freezes in the brush, a sudden drop of sweat running down his temple as he wonders if the young master actually spotted their location. Before they can make a decision, Muryang turns his back to them, and the three infiltrators seize the opportunity, leaping silently from the trees with their weapons drawn. Landing on the path, the leader quickly tucks his sword away, offering a polite bow as he claims they are simply trainees who accidentally stumbled upon his practice. Muryang scoffingly interrupts them, pointing his sword directly at them as he mockingly asks if they have any shame trying to pass themselves off as young trainees with those wrinkled, rotten old faces. These guys are failing the age verification test spectacularly. He coldly reveals that he has memorized the faces and names of every single trainee in this clan, and they aren't on his list. He smirks, noting that this works out perfectly since he needed some live targets to test his new move. Realizing their disguise has completely failed, the lead assassin grinds his teeth and silently signals his men to subdue the young master by force. Across the vast estate of the Cheon clan, there are countless training grounds hidden within the mountain peaks, and at this very moment, in one of the most secluded clearings, the trainees who were previously defeated by Muryang have gathered together, training like absolute madmen. Among them is Nuang Ryowoon, his bare chest drenched in sweat as he runs laps, shouting that he will definitely win back his sword in their next match. Cha Myung-hak sits nearby, lifting a massive stone weight, his scarred face twisted in pure determination. For some reason, the training yard has suddenly transformed into an intense bodybuilding competition. Suddenly, a frantic trainee bursts into the clearing, waving his arms and screaming that a massive problem has just occurred near the first son's quarters. He stops, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with genuine panic as he prepares to deliver the shocking news. The mention of Muryang instantly draws the undivided, terrifying attention of every single trainee in the clearing, their eyes glowing with intense interest. The messenger looks at them with absolute disgust, telling them to put some clothes on, before explaining that he just witnessed something incredible in the bamboo grove. Meanwhile, back in the quiet forest, the filtered sunlight through the leaves is suddenly shattered by the sharp, deafening ring of clashing steel. Leaves rain down from the canopy as the violent clash of weapons sends a shockwave through the clearing. Muryang moves like a phantom, parrying a heavy strike from the lead assassin with perfect, effortless grace. He easily slips through their coordinated attack, his movements so fast that one of the disguised guards is already lying unconscious on the dirt behind him. With a fluid spin, he avoids a wild swing from the second assassin, positioning himself perfectly for a devastating counterstrike. Using the heavy wooden scabbard of his sword, Muryang delivers a brutal, crushing thrust directly into the guard's solar plexus, knocking the wind clean out of him. The assassin collapses to his knees, clutching his chest and gasping for air as his vision begins to fade into darkness. Muryang stands tall over the fallen guards, his expression completely calm as he lightly tosses his practice weapon from hand to hand. The lead assassin backs away, sweat pouring down his face as he looks at his two unconscious comrades, realizing they completely underestimated the target's strength. He looks down at the cheap standard sword in his hand, cursing the fact that using unfamiliar weapons in their disguise has severely crippled their martial capabilities. Muryang slowly walks toward him, his voice cool and collected, as he demands that the guard reveal his true identity and purpose. The assassin raises his weapon in a defensive stance, desperately shouting that Muryang has no actual proof of who they are and will never find out their origin. Muryang lets out a soft, mocking laugh, asking who else but the desperate Dang clan would pull a pathetic stunt like this right before a crucial family banquet. He offers a sharp, triumphant smile, pointing out that everyone in the estate will immediately suspect them, which gives him the perfect, undeniable excuse to call off this unwanted marriage. The assassin's face twists in pure rage as he realizes they have walked directly into a trap of their own making, gritting his teeth in frustration. Muryang prepares his stance once more, his eyes locking onto the final opponent as he calmly announces that it's time to finish their little spar. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunges forward, his body low to the ground as he attacks the lead assassin from an unpredictable angle. The assassin raises his sword in desperation, shouting a war cry as Muryang's blade comes down with terrifying force. With a massive boom, Muryang unleashes the first successful form of his newly learned reverse scale slash, the sheer force of the blow echoing through the entire mountain. A blinding flash of spiritual energy illuminates the forest, leaving nothing but absolute silence in its wake as the dust slowly settles. Deep in another part of the forest, the elite Dang clan bodyguard stands over a simple, hand-drawn sundial carved into the dirt. He notes with growing concern that nearly 45 minutes have passed, yet the three operatives sent to neutralize the young master have still not returned. His face darkens with sudden panic, realizing that there is a very high possibility that their covert mission has completely failed. Determined to protect his lady so-hye, he decides he must destroy all evidence of their involvement immediately, knowing that even a shallow burial won't stop the clan's hounds from finding the bodies. Back at the training grounds, the Cheon trainees are absolutely furious after hearing about the Dang clan's attempt to murder a loyal maid over a simple dress stain. They march through the forest in a tight, angry group, their hands resting on their hilts as they discuss the sheer audacity of the guests. Cheon Muryang explains that because the Dang clan's poisons are so incredibly lethal, they have a brutal, uncompromising law to execute anyone who makes contact with their direct lineage. Another trainee adds that they saw the Dang guards themselves dodging in terror just to avoid accidentally touching their own lady's garments. A brief memory shows the Dang guards flinching in pure panic as so-hye walked past them, terrified of the invisible, deadly toxins she constantly carries on her person. The trainees admit that the thought of becoming one family with such a cold, poisonous clan is genuinely terrifying, especially since their own clan has always been fair and welcoming. Cheon Muryang agrees, noting that despite Muryang's past behavior, the Cheon clan is the only fair place that would accept an older, scarred warrior like him as a trainee. The young messenger points out that in any other clan, a trainee who dared to defy the eldest son would have had his head found in a latrine weeks ago. Nuong Ryawoon grunts in agreement, his pride wounded but his loyalty firm as he states that there is a strict limit to how much he will allow outsiders to look down on his home. The trainees quickly agree that they must find a way to assist the young master, as he is currently the only one with the status and strength to stand against the Dang clan. Ryawoon looks thoughtful, wondering how a group of mere trainees can possibly be of any help in such a high-stakes political conflict. Suddenly, Lee Seoki pushes his way to the front of the group, his face twisted in a fake show of righteous anger as he shouts about defending the clan's pristine honor. The other trainees watch him walk away with narrow eyes, whispering among themselves that they don't trust his sudden, dramatic change of heart. Walking alone through the brush, so-hye grins maliciously, realizing that this crisis is the perfect opportunity for him to win back the favor of the unit commanders. He plots to locate Muryang and, if push comes to shove, hand him over directly to the Dang clan to secure his own future. Suddenly, he spots a figure crouching in a clearing ahead. So-hye freezes behind a bush, his eyes widening in surprise as he recognizes the heavy armor and braided headband of a Sichuan Dang clan warrior. He watches in confusion as the guard frantically tries to spark a fire over a pile of dry leaves and hidden blood-stained clothes in a secluded spot. The bodyguard blows gently on the spark, his face tense as he desperately tries to get the fire to catch and burn the incriminating evidence. Suddenly, the guard's eyes snap open in shock as he hears a branch snap behind him, realizing his secret action has been discovered. So-hye panics, stumbling backward down the dirt slope as he realizes he has just made a fatal mistake. He gasps for breath, his face pale as he looks up at the ridge, praying that the guard didn't see him. Hearing his clumsy fall, two of the Cheon trainees quickly run to his location, asking him what on earth is wrong. So-hye looks up at them with a face full of sheer terror, his throat dry as he tries to warn them. He frantically scrambles backward on his hands and knees, screaming at them that they need to run immediately. He realizes with horror that because he witnessed a secret execution cover-up, the Dang clan will never allow any of them to leave this forest alive. The two trainees look up in confusion as a massive shadow suddenly blocks the sun. The Dang bodyguard leaps down from the ridge with a drawn blade. Before they can even draw their weapons, a swift, lethal arc of steel cuts through the air, instantly disabling his targets as So-hye watches in absolute, helpless horror. The forest is dead silent as a trap is sprung. While trying to burn the evidence of their failed ambush, the Dang bodyguard spots Lee So-hye and immediately lunges to silence him forever. He leaps through the air with a brutal downward strike, aiming to end So-hye's life before anyone else can even react. His eyes are filled with pure, murderous intent, knowing that a single living witness will completely ruin his lady's grand plan. Sparks fly in the dark woods as a heavy steel blade parries the lethal strike. Cha Myung-hak has stepped in just in time to protect his classmate. The assassin is stunned, staring at the young, scarred trainee who just casually blocked his full-force strike. With no time to lose, the other trainees draw their swords and swarm the elite warrior from all sides. Myung-hak unleashes a powerful, sweeping slash, forcing the bodyguard to jump back to avoid getting cut in half. Landing on his feet, the assassin grips his sword tightly, asking, "Who the heck are you guys?" He realizes these kids are way too strong to be normal trainees. Myung-hak just smirks confidently. "We aren't just normal students. We are the candidates selected for the clan's elite twin sword units." He mockingly taps the messenger trainee on the head with his hilt, noting that while the Dang clan is famous for its poisons, the Cheon clan completely owns the sword. In the murim world, elite martial units are the backbone of any major faction. The bodyguard instantly recognizes the legendary Heavenly Dragon and Heavenly Phoenix styles passed down by Grandmaster Seonhak. The messenger trainee whines and rubs his head as Myung-hak proudly explains that only 5 of the top 10 make the cut, playfully teasing the kid for barely qualifying. The bodyguard's face turns grim as he raises his weapon. "You might have fancy titles, but you've never faced a real master in a life-or-death battle." He prepares to fight all 7 of them at once, but before he can even blink, 2 trainees move with blinding speed, their swords flashing through the air. And just like that, the highly trained elite assassin is on the ground, bleeding. Apparently, all his real-world experience didn't help him dodge a basic double team. Before he can even process his instant defeat, the remaining trainees pin him down, holding their swords directly at his throat. The defeated assassin lets out a bitter laugh, realizing his own arrogance completely ruined him. He glares up at them, growling, "You little punks have no idea how cruel the real martial world actually is." But Myung-hak doesn't care about the dramatic speech. He just flings the unconscious bodyguard over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. The trainees begin their march back to the estate, proud and ready to present their prize to the young master. Walking behind the group, Lee So-hye suddenly clutches his stomach, groaning in pain as he looks for a quick escape. "I have to use the latrine, go on ahead." It is the oldest excuse in the book, and the other trainees just groan in annoyance and keep walking. Once they are out of sight, So-hye runs right back to the clearing, using a stick to sift through the smoldering ashes of the burned clothes. He finds a bundle of unburned fabric hidden under the leaves. A secret Dang clan uniform is the perfect blackmail material to secure his own future. Muttering in panic, he stuffs the green uniform into his robes, desperately hoping the others won't suspect why his bathroom break took so long. Back on the trail, the trainees complain about Seoki's weak stomach, but agree that his warnings about the Dang clan's shady nature were totally spot on. Myung-hak tells them to stay focused. Their main priority is finding the young master before the grand banquet begins. Suddenly, the young messenger stops and points toward a small clearing. Look, there he is! Muryang is sitting on a log, calmly examining the small glass vial of paralyzing poison he took from the attackers. He stands up as his allies approach, a cold and dangerous aura surrounding him as he prepares for the ultimate confrontation. The scene shifts as the sunset paints the sky in deep shades of orange over the grand banquet hall of the Cheon clan. Inside the brightly lit hall, a loud voice echoes through the rafters announcing the grand arrival of the master of the house. Walking down the long red carpet, Patriarch Cheon Muryang makes his entrance, flanked by his elite guards and senior advisors. He stands tall at the front of the hall, his gray beard and fine silk robes radiating absolute power and authority. The guests whisper in absolute awe, praising his dignified look and calling him the ultimate model of a true warrior. Muryang clasps his hands together, his face serious as he prepares to address the crowd. With a booming voice, he welcomes all the prestigious guests who traveled from far and wide to attend this grand banquet. But before the feast begins, the patriarch announces that he wants to welcome a very special guest of honor. The announcer steps forward, shouting, "Welcome the noble young lady of the Sichuan Dang clan." The massive wooden doors creak open, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Dang So-hye enters gracefully, her silver headdress clinking softly as she fans herself, surrounded by her imposing guards. Muryang nods in approval, declaring that the Cheon clan wishes to strengthen its historic ties with the prestigious Dang clan. With a firm and decisive tone, he officially announces the union of their two families through a sacred marriage alliance. The crowd erupts into excited whispers, some shocked by the sudden alliance, while others wonder who the lucky groom is. Standing right next to the patriarch, Uncle Seon-hak keeps his eyes closed, his face completely calm and quiet. So-hye lets out a soft, victorious giggle behind her fan, completely satisfied that the alliance is now official. Muryang looks up at the balcony, frowning slightly as he notices that several key family members are missing from this crucial event. He turns to an advisor, demanding to know where his eldest son is since he strictly ordered him to attend. In the crowd, So-hye's advisor smirks, whispering to her that since the first son has not shown up, their poison ambush was a total success. Believing his son just skipped the event out of laziness, Muryang sighs and commands the feast to officially begin. The sky outside turns a deep purple as the red lanterns of the estate glow brightly, with music and laughter echoing through the air. At the main table, Muryang enjoys the grand feast with his guests, preparing to wrap up the formal announcements. He stands up slowly, preparing to offer his deepest gratitude to the gathered nobility. He reassures the guests, saying, "My elite inner guards are stationed all around the estate, so please, enjoy the night without any worries." Talk about famous last words. But before he can even finish his sentence, a panic shout from the entrance cuts him off, causing his eyes to widen in shock. A frantic guard screams that the front gates are under attack, throwing the entire banquet hall into absolute chaos. With a massive crash, the wooden doors of the hall are shattered as a guard is thrown through the air, crashing hard against the red pillars. The battered guard slides onto the carpet, groaning in pain as the horrified guests scramble away from their tables. Slow, heavy footsteps echo through the dust of the shattered entrance, as a cold voice asks, "Who dared to block my path in my own home?" Patriarch Muryang stares toward the door, his face a mix of absolute shock and rising anger. Uncle Seon-hak opens his eyes, a glint of genuine amusement and pride shining in his gaze. So-hye's victorious smile instantly vanishes, her eyes narrowing in pure fury as she looks toward the door. Dressed in his peach-colored robes, Muryang strides into the hall with absolute confidence, surrounded by a wall of loyal trainees carrying the defeated guards behind him. ## Chapter 12. The grand banquet hall is filled with a deafening buzz of whispers as the prestigious guests stare in shock at the lean, handsome young man who just ruined the party. Standing in the back, Ryewoon grinds his teeth in panic, sweating profusely as he mutters, "The young master has completely lost his mind." Cha Myung-hak steps forward, commanding the nervous guards to lower their weapons, his booming voice instantly taking control of the room. He proudly announces to the entire hall, "This is Cheon Muryang, the eldest son of the Cheon clan." The guests gasp in disbelief, unable to connect this tall, slender, and strikingly handsome warrior with the lazy, out-of-shape kid they used to know. This is the ultimate glow-up. Patriarch Wigang is utterly speechless, turning to his brother Seonhak in complete disbelief as he tries to process his son's dramatic transformation. He notes with a heavy heart that it has only been a few months since he was away, yet his son has completely reshaped himself in such a short time. Muryang stops at the foot of the pavilion, standing tall as he looks up at his father under the massive golden dragon tapestry. Wigang narrows his eyes, his voice carrying the heavy weight of a patriarch as he asks, "What is the meaning of this outrageous commotion?" Muryang looks back with a calm, unyielding gaze. "Father, I have a critical matter to discuss directly with the head of the family." The patriarch crosses his arms, demanding his son speak his mind before the entire assembly. In Murim society, a marriage alliance is a sacred binding contract. Breaking one publicly is a massive political insult. Muryang knows this, but to save Wolyang and secure the antidote, he must shatter this engagement permanently. With a firm voice that echoes through the room, Muryang requests, "I ask that you immediately cancel my engagement to Dang So-hye." A collective gasp sweeps through the hall. The guests whisper in shock that the heir would dare to publicly defy his father's grand political decision. So-hye's face twists in pure, venomous rage behind her fan, a cold sweat breaking out on her neck as her perfect plan begins to fall apart. Wigang's face darkens with rising anger as he demands, "Explain yourself. Why are you making such an insulting request?" Muryang steps forward, declaring, "The Dang clan attempted to murder my personal maid, Wolyang, right here on our own estate." He adds that when he stepped in to stop them, they ignored his status as the heir and attacked him with lethal force. They used the chaos of the fight to poison my maid, leaving her in a critical state on the verge of death. So-hye slams her fan down, rising from her seat as she shrieks in anger. "The maid was rightfully punished under Dang clan law for ruining my dress. Are you really going to ruin a grand alliance over a mere servant?" Muryang glares back at her with absolute disdain. "She is not a mere servant. She is my person, and I will protect her." Wigang raises his hand to quiet the crowd, stating that while he respects the unique laws of the Dang clan, he was never informed of these events. He acknowledges that while the maid broke a rule, Muryang's act of protecting his household is not entirely wrong. Therefore, the patriarch calmly announces that he will not punish his son or make an issue out of the matter concerning the maid. But his face turns cold as he looks at Muryang. "But we cannot cancel a grand marriage alliance decided by both clans over a simple household dispute." So-hye lets out a smug, silent smirk behind her fan, completely confident that her political grip over the patriarch is unbreakable. But Wigang is not finished, his voice turning incredibly serious as he looks back at the young lady of the Dang clan. "However, if your guards actually targeted my son even after he revealed his identity, that is a grave offense that could lead to the immediate annulment of this engagement." Muryang looks up in hope, realizing this is the exact opening he desperately needed to break the alliance. But So-hye stands firm, her face a mask of innocent denial as she flatly lies, "Such an attack never took place." She claims it was merely a brief commotion caused by Muryang recklessly jumping in front of a blade meant to punish a servant, prompting an angry shout of denial from Muryang. The young messenger trainee steps forward, trembling but standing firm. "I saw it! The guard clearly targeted the young master." So-hye glares at him with terrifying, icy eyes. "Be careful of what you say. Lying in front of this assembly is a serious crime." The young trainee flinches in fear, but the other candidates step up to support him, their faces tense as they face the pressure of the nobility. Muryang offers a cold, confident smirk. "If you want to play dirty, I am more than ready to show my hand." With a sharp command, Cha Myung-hak drags the captured, tied-up infiltrators into the center of the hall, throwing them onto the carpet. So-hye gasps in genuine horror behind her fan, her eyes widening as she recognizes her own elite operatives. Muryang announces to the entire hall, "These are the disguised assassins who attempted to poison me to prevent me from attending this banquet." Patriarch Wigang leans forward in shock, his voice booming as he demands, "Is this the truth?" Myung-hak explains, "We caught these men disguised as trainees carrying a highly suspicious paralyzing drug, which we forced them to drink, leaving them in this state." Raiwon steps up, crossing his arms as he proudly testifies, "The young master has not touched a single drop of alcohol in months, and every trainee here can prove his perfect discipline." The patriarch remains silent, his face a mask of deep contemplation as the gravity of the situation So-hye quickly recovers her composure, mockingly asking, "And what actual physical evidence do you have to prove these men belong to my clan?" Myung-hak holds up the medicine bottle, stating that their medical hall confirmed the paralyzing drug is a highly advanced secret poison that could only originate from the Sichuan Dang clan. The gathered guests erupt into worried whispers, many agreeing that the Dang clan's underhanded methods are far too dangerous to associate with. Muryang smirks, looking directly at his fiancée. "How do you like the taste of actual, undeniable evidence?" He prepares to seize this perfect momentum, ready to declare the marriage alliance officially broken. But So-hye suddenly lets out a loud, mocking laugh, her voice dripping with pure amusement. "This is ridiculous. How does carrying a simple drug suddenly jump to an accusation of trying to poison the young master?" She suggests they could have intended to drink it themselves, adding that anyone could have stolen the trainee uniforms, making this far more likely to be an inside job within the Cheon clan itself. Her gaslighting skills are truly world-class. She mockingly asks, "Why should we trust the opinion of your medical hall? We should wait for our own superior physicians to analyze the drug." Muryang grinds his teeth in frustration, stunned by how quickly and ruthlessly she managed to spin the narrative back in her favor. So-hye looks down at him with a smug, victorious gaze. "Do you have any other pathetic accusations to throw at me?" The young messenger trainee frantically points to the bruised body of the Dang bodyguard, shouting, "But this man attacked us in the forest." But Muryang looks down in despair, realizing that a simple fight between a trainee and an outside warrior has nothing to do with proving a grand marriage conspiracy. Patriarch Wigang nods in agreement with So-hye, declaring that while they will investigate the matter separately, a simple opinion from the medical hall cannot serve as fact. He looks down at Muryang, his voice cold and demanding. "I need one final piece of undeniable proof to link these men to the Dang clan. If you have baselessly framed our guests without evidence to sabotage this alliance, it is a grave crime that will be strictly punished." With a chilling tone, the patriarch threatens to either disown his eldest son or leave him entirely to the mercy of the Dang clan's unique laws. Talk about Father of the Year. He stares directly into Muryang's eyes, asking him one last time if he has any other evidence to present. Muryang's face pales as sweat runs down his temple, realizing that a formal investigation will take far too long, and by that time, Wolyang will already be dead. He frantically thinks to himself, knowing he must find a way to settle this right here and now to save his maid's life. In the back, one of the drugged infiltrators groans, faking a stomachache and asking, "Can I please excuse myself to the latrine?" It seems bathroom excuses are a running theme today. Muryang glances back in annoyance, but his focus is suddenly drawn to another figure standing in the crowd of trainees. He spots Lee Seoki standing near the back, looking incredibly relaxed and smug, entirely unbothered by the tense situation. Muryang's eyes widen as his sharp assassin instincts pick up on a tiny, suspicious detail in Seoki's posture. Peeking out from beneath Seoki's blue trainee robes is a small patch of dark green fabric. It is the unmistakable silk of a Sichuan Dang clan warrior uniform. The plot thickens. When you are trying to save a life, every single second counts. One wrong move, and a friend dies. Deep in the quiet forest, a trainee runs up, breathless and desperate to share some urgent news, but Muryang does not have time for a casual chat. He steps directly into Lee Seoki's personal space, locking eyes with him as he bluntly asks what he is hiding under his robes. Muryang presses him hard, his gaze cutting right through the guy's shaky defense. He asks why the Dang assassins would try so hard to silence him unless he saw something he should not have. Seoki starts sweating bullets, quickly looking away as he tries to play dumb, claiming he has absolutely no idea what the young master is talking about. Muryang is not buying the act. He quietly reminds Seoki that they are already stuck in this mess together, so any thoughts of betrayal are completely useless. Seoki tries to sound like a man of honor, sweating through his collar as he swears his absolute loyalty to the clan. Of course, his track record of loyalty is about as solid as a wet paper towel. As the group finally walks off, Muryang keeps a close eye on him. He knows exactly what kind of snake Seoki really is. Back in the tense banquet hall, Muryang is barely holding back his anger. He knows this greedy idiot did not even hesitate before trying to hide evidence for his own gain. With a cold smile, Muryang looks at Seoki, knowing that whatever the rat is hiding, he is about to squeeze it out of him. Stepping before the patriarch, Muryang puts on a dramatic show. He asks his father to spare the other trainees and put all the blame on him. but Patriarch Wigang coldly responds that anyone involved in disrupting this marriage will face severe punishment. Hearing that everyone is going down together, Seoki's heart completely drops into his stomach. He quickly counts his peers on his fingers one by one until the terrifying realization hits him. Yes, his math is correct, he is definitely on the execution list. Seoki completely panics, screaming in disbelief, while Muryang casually plays along, acting like Seoki was the mastermind who proudly led them all to their doom. Seoki's mind races as he sweats through his clothes. He actually kept the partially burned uniform the assassins tried to destroy, hoping to use it as a bribe to join the Dang clan. He is caught in a beautiful trap. If he keeps the uniform hidden, he gets executed for a crime he did not commit. If he speaks up, his dream of joining the enemy clan is instantly ruined. To push him over the edge, Muryang looks at his father and dramatically begs for the most agonizing, slow punishment possible, listing off horrific scenarios with a completely straight face. That does the trick. Seoki completely loses his mind and screams, "Wait! I have the evidence!" Muryang lets out a dark, highly satisfied smirk. Hook, line, and sinker. The grand hall goes dead silent as Patriarch Wigang stares down, demanding to see what he is talking about. Behind her delicate pink fan, So-hye's calm expression completely cracks, her eyes widening in sudden panic. With trembling hands, Seoki holds up a charred piece of green fabric, frantically explaining how he caught the Dang clan warriors trying to burn their uniforms in the woods. He points directly at the two captured assassins on the floor, connecting all the dots for the entire room. In a quick flashback, we see the exact moment Seoki watched from the bushes as a disguised assassin tried, and hilariously failed, to properly burn the incriminating clothes. Back in the present, Seogi gasps for air, begging the patriarch to forgive his delay as he turns over the smoking gun. The trainees look on with newfound hope, but the heavy silence is broken as the massive Dang bodyguard slowly steps forward. With a sudden, violent shove, the giant bodyguard knocks one of the trainees to the floor, instantly raising the tension in the room to a boil. So-hye and her massive protector loom over Seoki like wolves cornering a helpless rabbit. Every single eye in the hall is glued to the burnt pile of green silk sitting in Seoki's shaking hands. Behind her fan, So-hye's face contorts with quiet rage, internally cursing her useless subordinates for leaving such a painfully obvious trail. She tries to argue that there is still no proof the clothes belong to her family, but Uncle Seonhak barks back, warning her to watch her mouth before she digs her own grave. Muryang leans in close, whispering mockingly in her ear that the family's legendary tracking dog, Thunder, can easily match the scent on the clothes to her men. So-hye grits her teeth, knowing he is right. Even a basic guard dog would be able to sniff out the truth from here. Muryang holds out his hand, offering her a simple deal. "Give me the antidote right now, and we will call off the wedding quietly without exposing your family's shame." He pushes her to the edge, asking if the proud Dang clan is actually ready to handle the humiliation of being publicly exposed as liars and poisoners. Sweat drips down So-hye's cheek as she tries to play her last political card, asking if he is really willing to start an entire war over a simple maid. Muryang's eyes turn ice cold as he demands the cure once more, showing he does not give a single damn about her empty threats. So-hye grits her teeth so hard you can almost hear them crack, her pride completely shattered. Suddenly, a massive crash echoes through the hall as a bearded Dang elder slams his hands on the table, sending plates flying in a fit of pure rage. The elder unleashes his spiritual power, a thick, suffocating purple mist swirling violently around his body. The onlookers gasp in sheer terror, recognizing the legendary purple cloud chi. In martial arts stories, colored energy mist like this is the universal sign of a peak realm master who can probably level a building with a sneeze. The elder roars in anger, accusing the Cheon clan of treating their honored guests like common criminals on trial. But Uncle Seonhak steps in without flinching, flaring his own massive crimson aura to match the elder's crushing pressure. The two terrifying energies clash in midair, making the entire room tremble. Seonhak warns him, "Keep shouting, and you will find out exactly why my sword is feared across the land." The Dang elder draws his weapon, his blade glowing with a deadly purple light as he prepares for a fight. Seonhak stands his ground like an immovable mountain, his red cape billowing as his aura flares brighter. Seeing their leader draw his weapon, the rest of the Dang warriors draw their swords in unison. Without hesitation, the Cheon clan guards step up, their blades ringing out as they prepare to defend their home. The entire banquet hall is frozen in a deadly standoff, a single spark away from starting an all-out war. Up in the balconies, the guests whisper in absolute panic, wondering if the Dang clan has completely lost their minds to start a fight here of all places. Then, a massive wave of pink spiritual energy erupts from the head of the table as Patriarch Wagong slowly stands up. Wagong speaks with a calm, terrifying authority, telling the Dang elder to cool his head and reminding everyone that a marriage cannot be broken without clear proof. The Dang elder sneers through the heavy pressure, claiming it sounds like the Cheon clan is just looking for any lazy excuse to back out of the deal. Wagong politely apologizes if his words sounded harsh, but his eyes tell a completely different story. A blinding light begins to gather behind him, swirling around the massive golden dragon tapestry on the wall. The guests in the balcony shield their eyes, gasping in awe as the spiritual pressure in the room skyrockets to impossible levels. Rainbow-colored beams of pure energy sweep across the entire hall, completely crushing the auras of all the lesser warriors. With a sudden, explosive burst of power, Wagong shatters the heavy table in front of him. 5 massive, radiant swords of pure light shoot up toward the ceiling, illuminating the entire room like a localized sun. The crowd goes wild with shock, realizing they are witnessing the legendary 5-bladed rainbow sword, a technique only a master of the profound realm can pull off. Standing beneath the floating blades of light, Wagong looks down like an angry god, warning them that his patience has its limits. His eyes glow with a terrifying light as he tells them straight up, "Do not test me any further." Chapter 14. The immense power radiating from the Patriarch keeps everyone frozen in place, the massive light blades humming with lethal energy above their heads. With the room completely subdued, Wagong commands Xianxia to immediately start a formal investigation, starting with the burnt uniform. So-hye can barely hold the charred fabric, his body shaking under the lingering weight of the Patriarch's terrifying aura. Wagong orders every single person involved to be locked up and interrogated separately, planning to tear apart their lives by comparing their stories. He declares that until the investigation is complete, the marriage is officially put on hold. The Dang elder grits his teeth, silently reassuring himself that their main sect is still strong enough to wipe this family off the map. But as he looks up at those massive glowing swords of light, a cold sweat breaks across his face. Yes, maybe threatening a guy who can summon giant laser swords is not the best career move. Behind him, the rest of the Dang warriors look completely defeated, their spirits entirely crushed by the display of power. Against a master of this level, any attempt at physical resistance feels like a quick way to get vaporized. The Dang elder slowly lowers his head, realizing he has no choice but to comply for now. So-hye looks around the room, her heart sinking as she realizes her allies have completely lost their will to fight. She hides her trembling lips behind her fan, wondering how a simple plan to poison a maid managed to blow up in her face so spectacularly. Dark, venomous thoughts swirl in her mind as she promises herself she will repay this public humiliation 1,000 times over. Putting on her best innocent act, So-hye suddenly speaks up, asking the Patriarch if the Cheon clan still lives by the ancient laws of a martial family. Wagong looks down at her coldly, confirming that they absolutely do. With a sly smile, she proposes they settle this dispute the old-fashioned way, with a duel between the involved parties, where the winner's decision is absolute. She looks directly at Muryang, challenging him to a spar. But Muryang flatly refuses, telling her to just hand over the cure and get back to Sichuan. In response, So-hye slowly raises her hand, displaying a small glass vial filled with a clear liquid. It is the only antidote. Her eyes turn incredibly sadistic as she whispers that if he refuses, his maid will be dead by midnight, and the resulting war between their clans will leave countless bodies in the streets. She dares him to accept the match if he actually cares about saving his servant's life. Muryang's jaw tightens as he glares at her. Playing the victim, So-hye claims she is too weak to fight herself, so her massive bodyguard will step in as her proxy, mockingly asking who will represent the Cheon clan. Wagong hesitates, stating that they do not have to agree to a duel just because they are a martial family, wanting to protect his son from a clear trap. But Muryang steps forward, calling out So-hye's name with absolute gravity. He tells her to keep her promise, and turns to the Grand Master, asking for official permission to take on the bodyguard. The 3 elders stare down at him in heavy silence, weighing the high stakes of this sudden challenge. Wagong looks at him like he has lost his mind, but Uncle Xianxia places a hand on his shoulder, telling him to just trust the boy and watch. Wagong is stunned, but Xianxia looks back with an incredibly serious expression, asking him to trust Muryang's skills. Wagong looks down, remembering his son as a lazy, useless scoundrel who never took a single thing seriously. He watches Muryang stand tall, wondering if it is even possible for a person to change so completely in such a short amount of time. But as he looks at the other trainees, he notices they are all standing firmly behind Muryang, their faces filled with absolute respect and trust. Seeing his son finally surrounded by people who believe in him, Wigang's eyes soften with a touch of pride. He looks back at the assembly and formally accepts the duel, declaring Cheon Muryang as the representative of their family. So-hye lets out a smug, victorious smile while Muryang locks his eyes onto his massive opponent, ready for blood. Muryang casually stretches, asking the servants to clear the food and move the heavy furniture out of the way. He would hate to ruin a perfectly good dinner after all. The dang elder watches with a mocking grin, muttering that the two of them are a perfect match in their foolishness. He scoffingly tells Wigang that he doubts they will ever see another couple so perfectly suited for disaster. Meanwhile, So-hye walks past her champion, quietly telling him to show absolutely no mercy. The massive bodyguard leans in close to listen to her final orders. She whispers directly into his ear, her voice dripping with pure venom. Her eyes turn completely wild as she reminds him that accidents happen in spars and nobody is held responsible for any unfortunate mishaps on the floor. She sneers, saying that even if her future husband loses an arm during the match, her devotion to him will not change one bit. Such a touching, loving bride. The clan's referee steps onto the red carpet, his face grim as he prepares to start the life-or-death match. The two fighters face off in the center of the cleared hall, the air thick with anticipation. The referee raises his hand, his voice booming through the silent room as he calls for order. With a loud shout, he officially starts the match, and both warriors instantly draw their weapons. Muryang does not waste a single millisecond, launching himself forward with a blindingly fast opening slash. His footwork is flawless, his blade tracing a perfect deadly arc through the air. A loud metallic clang echoes through the hall as the giant bodyguard barely manages to block the swift attack. The bodyguard's eyes widen in surprise, feeling the incredible weight and speed behind Muryang's strike. He grunts, using his massive physical strength to push Muryang's blade up and create some space. But Muryang is too fast. He fluidly spins on his heel, ducking under the counter and preparing a second strike. He sweeps low to the ground, his sword flashing like a silver streak toward the bodyguard's legs. The bodyguard reacts just in time, slamming his heavy sheath down to block the low swipe. Realizing he is being pushed back, the bodyguard secretly presses a hidden button on his hilt, unleashing a sudden burst of toxic purple energy from his blade. A sudden, explosive shockwave catches Muryang off guard, forcing him to let out a sharp gasp as he is violently blown back. His boots slide across the polished floor as he struggles to regain his balance. Without giving him a chance to breathe, the bodyguard leaps high into the air, bringing his heavy sword down for a crushing finish. But Muryang's assassin instincts kick in. He leaps backward into a graceful mid-air dodge, clearing the lethal strike by a hair's breadth. He lands softly on one knee, sliding back across the red carpet while keeping his eyes locked on his opponent. The bodyguard stands tall, a strange purple glow radiating from his weapon. Projecting inner spiritual energy through a weapon like this is a classic move of peak masters, essentially turning a regular sword into a magical laser blade. The trainees watch with bated breath, wondering if their young master can actually handle a peak-level assassin. But Muryang slowly stands up, a confident, wicked smirk spreading across his face. He locks his sharp lavender eyes onto the giant, whispering to himself that he has already seen right through the bodyguard's absolute peak technique. When you are running on borrowed time, every single heartbeat is a massive gamble. Right now, one swing of a blade will decide if a loyal friend lives or dies. Muryang stands firm, pointing his sword forward with absolute focus. Across the carpet, the giant bodyguard braces himself, his weapon humming with dangerous, glowing pink sword chi. He is heavy, imposing, and completely confident he can end this in a matter of seconds. Breaking the tense silence of the grand hall, Muryang stares him down. "Make your move." A heavy boot slams onto the floor, splintering the wood as the giant lunges forward with explosive speed. Without missing a beat, Muryang digs his heel into the red carpet, throwing his entire body weight into a countercharge. They sprint down the center of the hall, two forces of nature heading straight for a violent collision. The giant thrusts his sword forward, sending a sharp wave of purple energy tearing through the air. Sparks fly as Muryang barely parries the strike, the heavy vibration rattling right through his bones. To the guests watching from the balconies, this is a terrifying matchup. Muryang is dealing with a seasoned first-class warrior who wields pure raw sword chi. Physically, it is like a sports car trying to headbutt a freight train. The giant is simply much stronger, and Muryang knows he cannot win a direct test of raw muscle. But instead of backing down, Muryang relies on his quick reflexes, spinning his blade to create a tight defensive shield. The bodyguard is incredibly cocky, fully believing he is the one dictating the entire flow of this battle. He delivers a brutal kick, catching Muryang right on the chin and forcing his head back. Because he thinks Muryang is weak, the giant starts to show off, carelessly telegraphing his moves like a basic video game tutorial boss. He takes another step forward, completely convinced he has the young master cornered. He charges in for the final blow, expecting a quick and easy finish. But Muryang is already waiting for him. He blocks the heavy clash, instantly figuring out his opponent's true target. The giant is putting all his weight into the push, his eyes locked onto Muryang's right side. He is literally staring directly at the arm he wants to chop off. Subtlety is definitely not his strong suit. Knowing his enemy's plan, Muryang lets out a cold smile, standing his ground on the torn carpet. He basically dares the giant to try and take it, throwing himself right into the path of the incoming blade. The giant swings, completely focused on severing the limb to please his sadistic mistress. Their swords grind against each other once more, producing a high-pitched metallic shriek. The bodyguard sneers. "Are you really stupid enough to try the exact same parry a second time?" He lets out a mocking laugh, fully believing Muryang is just a brainless amateur who ran out of tricks. With a loud shout, the giant pushes down with all his might, aiming to cut through both the sword and the arm. Up on the stage, the elders watch in silence. True combat is not about what you think you know, it is about what you fail to see. In a high-stakes duel, a biased opinion of your enemy is nothing more than a dangerous, half-baked delusion. It tricks you into feeling safe, which is why arrogance will always betray a warrior on the battlefield. If you only see your opponent as they used to be, you are fighting a ghost of the past. You are not facing a living, breathing master, you are just fighting a rigid, wax figure of a dead man. The very second you believe you know your opponent, you lose the ability to read them at all. The giant bodyguard is completely blinded by his own smugness, lost in his fantasy of an easy victory. He truly thinks he has Muryang figured out just because of a few simple exchanges, but in a split second, Muryang's eyes flash a dangerous pink, his speed completely defying gravity as he slips right past the giant's guard. The bodyguard's smile instantly vanishes, his eyes widening in pure horror as his blade hits nothing but empty air. Before he can even process what happened, Muryang spins with blinding speed, his sword slicing through the air like a whip. With absolute focus and lethal intent in his eyes, Muryang unleashes a precise, crushing counterattack. Even the patriarch's jaw drops in utter disbelief at the sheer speed of his son's movement. With a swift strike, the giant's hand is sliced open, his heavy sword clattering to the floor as a painful scream rips through the hall. Uncle Seonhak instantly steps in, declaring the match over while proudly noting how close his nephew came to mastering the family's legendary style. Muryang calmly sheathes his blade, walking away from the whimpering giant who is now clutching his hand on the floor. So-hye's fan drops, her face turning pale as a ghost as her mind completely breaks down, unable to accept that her ultimate champion was crushed so easily. A hand reaches out toward her, steady and demanding. Panting heavily and covered in sweat, Muryang demands, "Give me the antidote. A deal is a deal." She glares at him with pure, unadulterated hatred, her hands trembling as she is forced to accept her utter defeat. With a bitter sneer, she tosses the glass vial into the air, and Muryang catches it. Finally holding the cure, Muryang turns his back on her, but his body is starting to feel incredibly heavy. His steps become uneven, his balance slipping as he stumbles down the long red carpet. Cold sweat pours down his face as he realizes his body has reached its absolute limit. In cultivation stories, meridians are the internal pathways that carry spiritual energy, and forcing too much power through them causes a catastrophic backlash. The sheer strain of absorbing the giant's raw sword chi has forced Muryang's blocked channels to rupture, sending his internal energy into a violent, chaotic reverse flow. A dark stream of blood begins to pour from his nose, staining his lips as his vision begins to dim. The grand hall starts spinning, the stone pillars and stairs fading into a dark, blurry haze. With a heavy thud, Muryang collapses face first onto the cold floor, the precious glass vial slipping out of his limp hand. His fading consciousness clings to a single desperate thought: he has to get this medicine to Wool-young before it is too late. But as his eyes slowly close, darkness completely takes over, leaving the fate of his loyal maid hanging in the balance.